Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel Comics, starting with the ability to replicate superhuman talents. Chapter 41 Monday. At the same time, Gino and Lex were discussing the experiment. On the campus playground. Bang! As a player knocked down his opponent and stepped into the scoring area, the onlookers instantly burst into cheers. "We are the champion!" Not only was the crowd excited, but the team members also shouted and rushed to their coach Watt, holding the chubby Watt to vent their excitement. The game was over, and after the cheers, Watt walked alone into the sauna funded by Luther Enterprises. Although he was publicly humiliated by Gino, Watt was so thick-skinned that he didn't care and just suppressed the resentment in his heart. Pfft! The water splashed on the boiling stones, and large green steam floated out. Watt took a deep breath of hot air, looking intoxicated. Da-da! There was a knock on the door. "Come in." Watt was wrapped in a bath towel and leaning on the armchair with a comfortable expression. Kaka. The door was pushed open, and Principal Guan in a suit and leather shoes walked into the sauna. The hot air temperature made Principal Guan frown slightly. "Coach Watt." Watt struggled to open his eyelids, glanced at Principal Guan, frowned and said, "What do you want from me?" "We need to talk." Principal Guan crossed his arms and said, "A student reported that you leaked midterm exam questions to the football team members. So they have to accept a 2-week suspension." 2 weeks of suspension. Coach Watt's voice suddenly rose. "His team has a game next week, and that game is about who is the champion." Watt asked. "Listen to me, Principal Guan, maybe we can let them finish the competition and then accept the punishment." "Impossible." Principal Guan shook his head. "Cheating is shameful, Watt, and because you offended Gino Luther, the funding given to us by the Luther Group has been cut in half." Principal Guan has a tough attitude. "The reason why I didn't fire you is that I'm very tolerant of you. This matter is non-negotiable, let them be prepared to accept the punishment." After saying this, Principal Guan turned and left, leaving only Watt with a livid face. When the door closed, Watt could no longer bear the anger in his heart and roared, "Gino, Gino, it's Gino Luther again." He clenched his fists angrily and punched the sauna wall. The next second, hot flames ignited and clung to the entire wall. "What?" Looking at the blazing flames, Watt couldn't believe his eyes and looked down at his hands. Immediately, a bold idea came to mind. Watt's black eyes reflected the jumping flames. "Gino Luther, it's time to pay with blood. Anyone who stands in my way must die. Monday is a day that both adults and children hate. Have you heard? The football match last night was really exciting." Little Black Pete looked regretful. "It's a pity that I was hospitalized due to fright and did not participate in that game." Peter was a little embarrassed when he thought about being frightened and fainted yesterday. He was the only one in the group who fainted. "Yeah, but Coach Watt's temper is too bad." Chloe raised the newspaper in her hand. On the cover was a scene of Watt holding a player and yelling in the rain. At this time, it happened that a group of football players followed Coach Watt and gathered downstairs to listen to Watt's speech. Sensing the feeling of being spied on, Gino turned his head faintly, and his eyes coincidentally collided with the gaze cast by Watt. Their eyes met, and Watt finally looked away. "This old guy looks at me with deep hatred." Gino's expression was indifferent, his eyes were slightly focused, and he used his perspective ability to scan Watt's body. Then, his expression gradually became intriguing. And Clark saw his goddess Lana among them at a glance, and she looked very angry and was arguing with Watt. "Have you heard?" Chloe approached Gino mysteriously. "During the midterm test, Watt secretly leaked questions to his players. Recently, the school plans to launch an investigation into Watt. I think Lana got into a fight with Coach Watt over that." Clark looked at the football players watching with some envy. "He is a good coach, but he has a bad temper. The outstanding members of the football team are stars in school. Clark's dream has always been to join the school football team, so it is normal for Clark to speak for Watt. But recently, his parents were very angry with him. Clark didn't want to cause trouble, so he had to keep the idea of joining the team in his heart." While the group was talking, the rugby team on the other side seemed to have ended their dispute. An angry Lana walked straight to the teaching building holding her books. "Hey, Lana, what happened?" Clark ran to Lana with some worry. The two people walked into the teaching building side by side. "Ah!" Seeing Clark running towards the goddess, Chloe sneered, "I don't know what's so good about that girl." Little Black Pete laughed and joked, "Jealousy blinds you, Lana is loved by everyone. Lie. Chloe said angrily, raising her voice, at least Gino's attitude toward Lana is average. Kino, am I right? Chloe's question interrupted Gino's thoughts. Hey? What did you say? Gino turned his head and looked at the blonde girl. I mean, do you like Lana too? Facing Gino's gaze, Chloe turned her head shyly and curled her short hair with one hand. Like? No, I don't like her. She is Clark's crush. Gino shook his head. Not to mention that robbing his friend's goddess was a shameful thing. The number of Lana's ex-boyfriends alone would only make Gino stay away from her. Then what were you thinking about just now? Nothing. Gino shook his head, but his eyes swept over Coach Watt's hands. Under the gaze of his clairvoyant ability, Gino could clearly see the green energy surging in Coach Watt's hands. This guy has also awakened his superpower. With a smile on his lips, Gino felt that it would be very lively recently. Just as a group of people entered the classroom, Clark also ended his conversation with Lana and said in a brisk tone, Lana quit the cheerleading team. Quitting the cheerleading squad. Chloe raised her eyebrows, took out a small notebook from her pocket, and murmured, the campus goddess quits the cheerleading team. This is big news. Clark was a little helpless. Hey, Chloe, come on. Too many things have happened recently, and Lana feels that she should find her true self. Look for her to do one thing she's good at. Listening to Clark's defense of Lana, Gino sighed, patted Clark on the shoulder and said, then this is an opportunity, seize it. Clark was stunned. What's the meaning? What he means is to ask Lana what she wants to do, and then. Chloe smiled evilly and poked Clark's waist. After reading yesterday's chapter review, how did the readers guess that the Day of Destruction was going on? Doomsday does not qualify. In DC movies, comics, and TV series, there are roughly 3 births of Doomsday. One in the comics, it is the failed product of Kryptonian scientists. It is the most powerful killing machine. It was originally sealed inside Krypton and was liberated due to the destruction of Krypton. 2 in the movie, the haired version of Lex is a monster created from the corpse of General Zod using Kryptonian spacecraft technology and his own blood. 3 in the TV series, General Zod and his deputies were built from Kryptonian creatures. Let me put another reminder. Comic New 52 Eternal Evil. Chapter 42 The sky cleared up, the rain stopped, and Watt stood up. Evening. Within the newspaper club. Phew, finally sorted out. Chloe dusted off her hands, and there were neatly stacked newspapers at her feet. The girl turned around again and smiled and winked at Gino, thank you for your help, rich man. Easy to do. Kino shrugged, holding a newspaper and reading. Chloe was curious, what are you looking at? Gino turned over the newspaper so that Chloe could see it clearly. Lana's parents died in the meteorite rain in the small town 13 years ago. Yes, but I think she is very happy now. Chloe sighed. Clark even missed the weekly club cleaning event for his goddess. Just after school, Clark ran to the place where Lana worked, which made Chloe a little angry. He is a bastard who values sex over friends. The two walked out of the teaching building while chatting. A gust of night wind came, and Chloe couldn't help but tremble, frowning and complaining, it's really cold here. Help! A scream interrupted the communication between the two. Gino frowned slightly and cast his gaze in the direction of the sound. Looking through the thick cement wall and past several old cars, the boy saw a ball of flames surrounding a car, and the person inside the car had seen it not long ago. Principal Guan. Gino frowned, broke the fire glass at the door and took out the fire extinguisher. Let's go rescue people. Chloe also lifted a can of fire extinguishers. Okay. The two people rushed to the place where the fire broke out, which was located in the parking lot on the right side of the campus teaching building. In the rich darkness of night, the flames soaring into the sky looked extremely dazzling. Oh my god, there's someone inside. Chloe's eyes widened. She saw a figure in the car wailing miserably and banging against the car door in an attempt to escape. The girl panicked and tightened her grip on the fire extinguisher. What should we do? Kino strode towards the burning car, unplugged the fire extinguisher and said briefly, put out the fire, save people. For ordinary innocent people, Gino is willing to lend a helping hand. He is not mentally ill and likes to watch an innocent life being burned to death in his own eyes. Gino raised the nozzle in his hand and pointed it at the scorching fire. Pfft! Thick dry powder was sprinkled on the flames, and with constant spraying, the originally ferocious fire was brought under control. Throw away the empty bottle of fire extinguisher. He glanced at the scene inside the car. Because a minute had passed since I heard the call for help, and at this moment, there was a flame in the car. The fire ignited the interior decoration of the car and raised a large plume of black smoke. Many flames even burned along the seats to Principal Guan, using his suit to cause a secondary ignition. Help me, help me. Principal Guan's voice was as miserable as a ghost, the flames burned his skin, and the pain made him slap the glass in an attempt to escape. Jino pulled the door switch with a cold face, but found that it could not be opened. The car door won't open. Making a quick decision, Jino raised his fist. Bang! A punch shattered the glass, and Jino gently grabbed the car door and pulled slightly. Kaka! The solid car door was easily torn open by the huge force. Jino ignored the billowing smoke pouring out of the car. He grabbed the wailing Polo and threw him to the ground. He then took the fire extinguisher handed over by Chloe and put out the fire on him. A flame. As the flames extinguished, a bloody cheek appeared in Jino's field of vision. The man who originally had jet black hair now only had his burnt and red scalp, which looked terrifying and ferocious. Jino looked solemn, frowned and turned his head away. He's got extensive burns on his skin. Chloe, get on the phone, we need help. Ah, good. Chloe dropped the fire extinguisher and hurried toward the classroom, where there were landlines to contact the fire station and hospital. Weird flames. Jino glanced at the car that was almost burned to pieces, and looked at the first-floor teaching building not far away as if he was feeling something. Aha! The window of the office on the far right side of the first floor was closed, and for a brief moment, Jino could see clearly the appearance of the man, who was none other than Coach Watt this morning. Arsonist. Jino narrowed his eyes. Late at night. Buzz buzz. Fire trucks, police cars and ambulances roared toward the school. On the other side of the road, a silver-white Bugatti roared towards a two-story villa. Jino stepped on the brakes lightly, and the Bugatti gently stopped outside the villa. Thank you for taking me home. Chloe opened the car door and said thanks with a pursed lips. Want to come up and sit down? I have no one at home. No. Jino also got out of the car and threw the keys of the sports car to Chloe. Drive it back to school for me tomorrow. Chloe hurriedly took the key, a little confused. Wait, where are you going? Go investigate something. Jino didn't hide it from Chloe, and looked in the direction of the school with his blue eyes, where the lights were brightly lit. I suspect the fire was man-made. He already has a suspect in his mind, and judging from Coach Watt's vengeful character, that guy is likely to attack him or his family, so he must go back and keep an eye on Watt. What's the meaning? Get some rest early. Jino wasted no more time and walked away under the gaze of Chloe, who hesitated to speak, disappearing into the night. On campus. Because of the sudden fire, many fire trucks and police cars were parked at the school. Several police officers were holding small notebooks and questioning Watt, tonight's witness. The cunning fat man narrowed his eyes slightly and pretended to be completely unaware. I don't know, officer. When the fire broke out, I was watching TV in my office. I was also very sad about what happened to Principal Guan. The two policemen quite agreed, regretfully, and nodded, yes. No one wants to see this happen. Principal Guan is really pitiful. 40% of the skin on his body was burned. Whether he can survive is unknown. We can only pray that God will bless him. Watt on the side made a listening gesture and said in a regretful tone, yes, may God bless him. Because Watt was indeed in his office when the fire broke out, and the police found no traces of arson in the car, they hastily defined the case as a fire due to aging wiring in the car. The fire was settled due to the aging of the car. After the police left, Watt returned to his office. With a proud smile on his face, the old fat man turned on his record player and pressed the record of Napoleon's March on the record player. Accompanied by the soothing and exciting music, Watt held a wine glass and slowly sipped red wine. Next. He slowly raised his head, holding the wine glass in one hand and putting the other hand behind his back, like a triumphant king. He looked at the map of the town on the wall of his office, and his eyes fell on the gas station on the east side of the town. It's the damn Luther family's turn. Chapter 43, Reaping the Consequences. Late at night. On the highway near the small town of Smallville. Buzz. A tanker truck loaded with gasoline drove smoothly on the highway. A powerful rock song was playing in the car. The driver, named Card, bobbed his head to the music. Drop. The truck drove through a sharp bend, and under the illumination of the headlights, Card saw an old pickup truck parked not far away. Damn it! Card cursed secretly, which idiot stopped in the middle of the road? Did he? Card pressed the horn, and the sound passed through the night, but no one answered. What happened? Card frowned slightly and glanced at the time subconsciously. He had to deliver the gasoline within the specified time, otherwise half of the salary for the transportation would be deducted. Kaka. The middle-aged man opened the door and picked up the APXA-1 pistol located in the passenger seat. In free America, truck drivers who travel long distances are generally equipped with some weapons to avoid the risk of robbery and accidents. Card held the pistol and pressed the baseball bat on his head. He walked towards the scrapped pickup truck, cursing and shouting, "Fuck! No matter who you are, drive your car away immediately." Rustle. There was a strange movement in the dense forest not far away, and Card clenched the gun bolt alertly. Who is there? Before he could get closer, the man felt the handle of the gun getting hot. Shit! It was like putting a gun into the desert and roasting it for a day and a night. The extreme temperature made Card scream in agony, and the gun in his hand also hit the ground along his arm. What happened? Card looked at the red pistol in horror. This strange scene made his heart beat faster and he swallowed hard unconsciously. Didn't he encounter a supernatural event? Buzz. There was a roar of trucks behind me. Card turned around and saw his truck rushing towards him at an extremely fast speed, and sitting in the driver's seat was a middle-aged man with an evil smile on his face. Die. A trace of cruelty appeared on Watt's face. He pressed the accelerator to the bottom, turned the steering wheel lightly and controlled the big truck to slam into Card. The headlights hit Card's face, reflecting his frightened face. No. Pudgy. It was like hitting a soft flour bag. The poor truck driver didn't even have time to call for help when he was thrown off by the front of the truck. He hit the concrete roadside and rolled continuously until he fell to the ground motionless. Looking at the driver who died under the car, Watt's eyes were cold, as if what he had just killed was just an ant. He decided to take revenge, a decision made 3 minutes after he gained his powers. Everything that happened tonight gave Watt a strange feeling. Ever since he discovered that he could control flames, Watt had hatched a perfect plan in his heart. First, when Principal Guan got into the car, he controlled the flames to melt the door lock and let it close, and then ignited the flames in the car and burned Principal Guan alive. Although there were some minor flaws in the plan, and Principal Guan, who was about to be burned to death, was saved by the damn Gino, Principal Guan wouldn't be able to survive for long with that kind of injury. Watt twisted his fat body and let out a contented sigh. His plan went well, and now, Watt decided to kill the guy he hated the most, which was Gino Luther. However, Watt also knew that Luther Castle was heavily guarded and not ordinary people could break into it. His fat body and wide body were not conducive to sneaking into Kino's room alone and burning him to death, but this did not mean that Watt would not think of a way. After thinking about it, the man came up with a more sinister plan. Since he couldn't infiltrate, he simply robbed an oil tanker and learned what people on the other side of the world were doing. He drove the oil tanker to Luther Castle, jumped out of the car the moment it broke into the castle, and then used his ability to set the gasoline truck on fire. Then there was a boom explosion, blowing all the people in the castle into the sky. The sound of music in the car interrupted Watt's thoughts, and the man took out the crumpled map from his pocket. Watt said to himself, "Next, let me see how to get to Luther Castle." Just as he was about to turn on the lights in the car, a chuckle came from behind him. The voice said calmly and with a gentle tone, "Drive forward 2 kilometers, then turn left for 1 kilometer and then turn right onto Smallville South Road. Then drive 500 meters forward and turn right to Luther Castle." The owner of the voice seemed to be very enthusiastic and carefully told Watt how to reach the location of Luther Castle. However, this sudden sound made Watt break into a cold sweat. The reason is simple. He should be the only one in this car. So where does the sound behind him come from? Snapped. Watt immediately turned on the car lights, and the orange light dispelled the darkness and brought light. Under the light, Watt saw an elegant young man through the rear-view mirror. He was wearing sweatpants and sitting in the back seat of the car with his legs crossed, one arm resting on the window, the other hand gently falling on his thigh, his fingers tapping his knees, and his blue eyes staring at Watt with amusement. "You." Watt's expression changed drastically. The guy sitting in the back seat turned out to be Gino Luther. Before he had time to think about how the other party sneaked into the car, Watt subconsciously let his hands feel hot. Just as Watt was about to turn around and smash his fist into Gino's face, the next second, his vision went dark. Gino's actions were much faster than him. Before Watt could make a move, Gino suddenly reached out and grabbed Watt's neck. Bang! An irresistible force caused Watt's head to hit the steering wheel hard. Drop! The truck made a long honking sound. Why, I showed you the way, didn't you even say thank you? Coach! Gino's expression was flat, and he pinched Watt's head again. Bang! Another intimate collision between his temple and the steering wheel, but this time, Watt only felt his brain was dizzy, and the continuous collisions made a buzzing sound ring in his ears. Gino repeated the movements with his hands expressionlessly. During this period, Watt also tried to reach out to push Gino's left hand away, but the arm, which was like a steel bar, was extremely hard. Watt's burning flames could not hurt him at all. Instead, Gino accelerated the frequency of collisions. Bang bang bang! Rhythmic banging sounds echoed in the car along with Watt's wailing. Boom! There was another impact, and this time, Watt didn't even have the strength to scream. The skin on his forehead was ripped open, and the red blood stained his entire fat face. Snapped! Gino pushed open the car door and kicked the dead dog like Watt out of the car. The plump coach lay weakly on the cold concrete pavement. Everything in front of him was reflected in a double image. He saw countless Kino walking towards him. Please, please don't kill me. Watt was afraid. He was really afraid. He was afraid of Gino's ruthlessness, and the other party was not afraid of his flames. These all proved that he was no match for Gino. Watt struggled to speak. I was wrong, I'm sorry. He wanted to beg for Kino's forgiveness. He saw Gino slowly squatting down. He heard the young man's cold voice, if an apology is useful, what else do we need the police for? Thanks to the boss of Dawn for the 100-point reward, I love you. Chapter 44 Father and Son. Thank you for taking me home. Lana was walking on the forest path with her hands behind her back, a smile on her face. No, you're welcome. Clark scratched his head and smiled shyly. Today after school, he didn't stay at the club to clean up. Instead, he went to the small town where Lana worked to help. The two of them walked side by side, and Clark felt that it felt great. However, like a story that will end sooner or later, after walking through the dense forest, a two-story villa with lights appeared in their sight. Okay, my house is here. Lana took a few steps forward, turned around and looked at Clark, and said with some embarrassment, originally, I wanted to invite you to my house as a guest, but my aunt is very angry about the house being smashed. She recently very angry. I know. Clark scratched his cheek thoughtfully and pointed to his farm not far away. Well, good night. Lana smiled and waved. Good night. Clark watched the girl leave, feeling as if he had eaten a piece of honey. The boy turned around and ran towards his home with a happy smile on his face. Bang! Before Clark could run home, a terrifying explosion exploded, and the huge sound enveloped the entire town, as terrifying as roaring thunder. That is. Clark looked along the place where the sound came from, and saw orange-red jumping flames and thick smoke igniting half of the sky. Whoosh! Clark did not hesitate and ran towards the direction of the fire. Like an afterimage. Clark rushed to the fire scene easily. Crack! On the highway, the overturned oil tanker was caught in the scalding flames, and the surrounding trees were also ignited by the flames. If no one controls it, the nearby woods will be engulfed in flames. I have to stop this disaster. Clark looked solemn and used his super speed to search for a fire extinguisher in nearby residents' homes. He was carrying a fire extinguisher and running back and forth at the fire scene. Under the terrifying speed, only an afterimage could be seen, constantly looking for fire extinguishers and oil tankers going back and forth around the town, and the fire was also constantly weakening. Pfft! Another can of fire extinguisher was poured down, and the burning flame was finally extinguished. Hoo! Clark gasped for air, wiping sweat from his face. This. Clark looked around and soon saw two charred mummies in the charred ruins. Dehydrated, the two corpses were like two burnt sticks. Clark could not see the cause of their deaths and could only attribute them to natural disasters. They're dead. Clark looked at the two corpses with some guilt. If only I were nearby, I could save them. The sound of police sirens not far away interrupted Clark's thoughts. The boy knew he couldn't stay here. He sighed deeply, turned around and ran away. Clark crossed the street, skirting around oncoming police cars, until he saw an unexpected figure walking down the road at breakneck speed. With his tall figure and that dashing temperament, Clark frowned slightly, with some bad guesses in his heart. Kino. Clark called out the man's name. Gino was walking on the road, and when he heard Clark's voice, he had a look of helplessness on his face. He had just thrown Watt into the oil tanker for a charcoal grilling when Clark noticed the fire coming. Clark rubbed his hair and said in an unnatural tone, "It's so late, what are you doing here?" He was a little worried that the fire was caused by Gino, but he believed that Gino had a reason. After listening to Clark's words, Gino sneered. Clark's rhetoric was too immature. Sighing, Gino pointed at the night sky above his head. "Me? I'm here for a walk watching the stars." In a small town without industrial pollution, many bright stars shine brightly. "Then, did you see the fire just now?" Clark looked solemn. "2 people were burned to death. What does that have to do with me?" Gino glanced at Clark and said as he walked, "Remember I told you on the first day of school, Clark, I don't like to meddle in other people's business. If I do, it proves my mood." Good. This was of course a lie. Gino just wanted to send Clark away. Otherwise, if Clark knew that Watt was killed by him, the guy would have to preach a lot of nonsense. So, sometimes it doesn't matter what the truth is, only lies can satisfy both parties. Listening to Gino's words, Clark looked at Gino suspiciously. "Are you sure? Believe it or not, it's time for me to go home." Gino waved his hand, not wanting to argue with Clark. Clark looked at Gino, who had turned into an afterimage and disappeared into the night, with thoughtful eyes. "What is the truth?" Luther Castle. As soon as Gino walked to the dark and huge iron gate of the castle, he saw several Rolls-Royce cars parked on the lawn inside the gate. Glancing at the license plate from Metropolis on the back of the car, Gino couldn't help but smile playfully. "Wow, it looks like someone is going to be unlucky." "Master." The old housekeeper opened the iron door for Gino. "The master is in the hall." "Well, Lex might not be in a good mood tonight." Gino smiled. His cheap brother and Lionel had different personalities. Simply put, when 2 particularly opinionated guys get together, it can only be a disaster. Before he reached the living room, Gino heard the sound of iron swords clashing inside. Walking into the hall, 2 figures wearing protective gear were having a heated exchange. As the frequency of stabbing sword strikes continued to increase, soon the figure on the right became difficult to parry, which gave the opponent an opportunity. Bang! The stabbing sword pressed down on the other stabbing sword and thrust forward suddenly along the blade. The headless sword was pressed against the throat of the figure on the right, and a cold snort came from under the winner's mask. "Ha, it looks like you have a lot to learn." Lionel took off his mask, revealing a sullen cheek. Bang! The loser took off his mask and smashed it to the ground angrily. Lex stared coldly at his legal father, silent. Lionel dropped his bayonet and walked out of the castle, not forgetting to tell Lex, "I want to see you lay off 20% of your employees next week, kid." Passing by the calm-looking Gino, Lionel glanced at his mysterious little son and said calmly, "Also, you are responsible for monitoring him." Lionel left with his secretary and assistants, leaving only Lex with a gloomy face. Gino chuckled and walked straight to the sofa. The mates who dared not breathe quickly brought fruits and milk. Taking a bite of the crispy apple, Gino raised his eyebrows at Lex and said, "Our loser seems to be in a bad mood." "Ha, stupid old man." Lex took a deep breath, picked up the helmet on the ground, and said with a gloomy look, "Just wait, sooner or later I will let him sincerely praise my career." Chapter 45 Bank Robbery. Early morning. Kent Farm. The latest news from the small town of Smallville is that around early morning local time, a large truck full of gasoline overturned on the highway and caused a fire. According to an investigation by the local police, the 2 deceased were the truck driver and a physical education teacher from a local high school. It is reported that the physical education teacher was a very good football coach. Jonathan put down the newspaper in his hand, sighing a little. "Another person died in this town. I don't know if it's his own illusion, but Jonathan always feels that someone will die in the town every once in a while, as if he is under some kind of strange curse." At the dinner table, Clark was obviously taken aback when he heard Coach Watt's name. Recalling his meeting with Gino last night, he had a bad suspicion in his mind. It is very likely that Coach Watt was killed by Gino. "I'm stuffed." Clark sighed, ate the peanut sandwich in his hand, put on his school bag and left the farm. He was a little preoccupied, and the reason was simple. Clark felt that Coach Watt was killed by Gino. But Clark also felt that Gino must have his reasons for killing Watt. So now Clark is very entangled. He wants to advise his friends not to kill people randomly, but thinking back to Gray's incident, Clark feels that he is not qualified to ask Gino to do anything. Throwing his backpack in the passenger seat, Clark got into the driver's seat and started the off-road vehicle that Gino gave him. After a big fight with his adoptive father, Jonathan repaired the off-road vehicle in order to ease the relationship between the two. It can only be said that Clark was lucky, that Punch burst the water tank instead of the engine. Small town. The Dream Bank is located in a yellow commercial storefront in the center of the town. Kaka. The store door opened, and Gino walked into the bank with a red school bag on his back and an evil smile on his face. Mr. Kino. The bank manager sitting in the office hurriedly put down the phone. The Luther family was a distinguished customer of the local bank. The chubby manager was a little surprised by the sudden arrival of the young man. Generally speaking, if the other party needs money, he or she can arrange for someone to send the money with just a phone call. How can I help you? The manager had a warm smile on his face. Show your big white teeth and extend your hand to show friendship. Well, it's nothing. Gino smoothed his hair, smiled and shook hands with the manager. I want to close my account in the bank and withdraw the money. What? Hearing Gino's words, the manager's face was full of horror. Please, are you dissatisfied with our bank? Please tell me and we will definitely improve. It's not the manager's fault. If the bank's largest depositor leaves, his position as manager will be over. What do I need to explain to you? Gino frowned and stared at the manager coldly. Of course not. The manager sneered, secretly thinking of bad luck, and walked to the counter. How much money do you plan to withdraw? Well, take them all out. All. The manager frowned and looked at Kino. You have $500,000 in your card. If you withdraw it all at once, you may not be able to get it all by yourself. The smile on Gino's face froze slightly, and he hesitated. Then, how about taking out $50,000? The manager stared at Gino suspiciously, and slowly took out the accounting book. Please sign here. Okay. Kino crookedly wrote his name. The manager picked up the check and looked at Kino's handwriting from 13 years ago in the cabinet. The former is crooked and twisted, while the latter's writing is erratic. These two handwritings don't look like they were written by the same person. The manager narrowed his eyes slightly, becoming more suspicious. He raised his eyebrows lightly and stared at Gino's cheek. Mr. Gino, can I see your driver's license? Hearing the manager's words, Gino's face froze, then he smiled and said, of course. His hand reached for his backpack. The next second. A dark American III was held in Gino's hand, and his handsome face was full of violence. Give me the money now. Immediately. Buzz. Clark drove the off-road vehicle on the small town road. He had visited this road leading to the school countless times. Jingle bell. The bank on the roadside rang a shrill alarm bell. What happened? Clark frowned and looked towards the roadside. I saw my friend Gino running with a red backpack. Kino. Clark stopped the truck and stood in front of Kino. What are you doing? Clark knew Genio. Even if he could run, Genio would not be so slow. Get away. Gino glared at Clark, who was blocking the road, and pushed hard with both hands. Bang! Clark didn't even come back to his senses. He flew upside down and smashed the glass on the roadside. He was lying on the mannequin in a state of embarrassment, looking at Gino's back with a blank look on his face. Clark rubbed his eyes and saw the surrounding scene turn to black and white. He saw a running skeleton. What surprised Clark the most was that the skeleton was almost soaked in dark green and was running away with a school bag. The further away. Clark scratched his head and patted the glass shards off his body. Under the murderous gaze of the store owner, he murmured in confusion, "What's going on?" Smallville Township High School. In the first period of indoor physical education class, the substitute teacher clapped her hands and urged, "Hurry up, hurry up. Today's task is to climb up and then climb down again. Even if you complete the task." Several thick hemp ropes were hung high in the sky. The students followed the teacher's instructions to climb to the highest point and then come down. Men and women were divided into two groups. In the team at this moment, Clark said to Gino worriedly, "Something strange happened this morning. I saw you rob the bank. Me? Gino was amused by Clark's words, pointed to his cheek, and rubbed his temples. I remember today is not April Fool's Day, there is nothing funny about this joke. He, a dignified family member, the second generation of American wealth, could become a chaebol in Bangsa country, but he would actually rob a bank? Gino joked in a joking tone, maybe someone is pretending to be me. After listening to Gino's words, Clark showed a thoughtful expression, maybe it's really a fake. Clark approached Kino and said mysteriously, Kino, have you had that recently? What? Gino frowned and silently distanced himself from Clark. Well, I just discovered that I have awakened a new ability. Clark approached Kino again and told Kino everything that happened this morning in a low voice. After I found out that I had gained the ability, I saw that the man's bones were green and smaller than those of an adult male. The imposter pretended to be you. Listening to Clark's words, Gino showed an interested look on his face. Green bones? It's interesting. Chapter 46 The Weird Wife. Jim. Gino was thoughtful, and Clark asked curiously, what are you going to do? It's easy, Clark. Gino snapped his fingers, regained his smile and said, since this person used my appearance to rob, it means he has seen me. I usually only move around at Luther Castle and the school. Excluding the former, the answer is simple. The guy pretending to be me is someone from the school. Clark suddenly realized and said, just like Jerome, that person has also awakened his powers. That's right. Gino gently held Clark's shoulders, then held Clark's head and looked towards the wall on the right. The young man murmured in a low voice, hold your breath and concentrate. What did you see? Clark subconsciously followed Gino's guidance and took a deep breath to concentrate. His pupil shrank, and as his sight narrowed, Clark found that his eyes were looking through the wall, and the scenery inside the wall was unobstructed. Inside was the ladies' bathroom, with many young and beautiful girls swaying their wet long hair and wearing all kinds of underwear. Their long legs and S-shaped figures made Clark stunned. His goddess Lana was wearing a bath towel, showing off her beautiful figure. Please give me a break. The girl walked around her classmates and walked to her locker with a smile. Then, Lana slowly took off her bathrobe. As the towel slid, Clark could no longer suppress the corners of his mouth. The corners of his mouth were raised, gradually revealing 2 rows of big white teeth. Does it look good? Gino's laughter rang in his ears. Clark paused, resisted the urge and turned his head. He stared at Gino and said righteously, Gino, this is immoral. Although this scene was very tempting, the kind-hearted Clark decided to control his sight and not look too much. You didn't say that when you saw it just now. Gino smiled, patted Clark on the shoulder and said, this is my way, use my own ability to find that guy. Dingling bell. When the bell rang for the end of get out of class, Gino let go of Clark and walked out of the gym on his own. Wait a minute, Gino, I still think this should be done. Clark began his sermon again, and the two walked side by side. After a while, Gino and Clark almost visited the entire campus. Almost all the students from the first year to the 4th year of high school have tried it all and still haven't found the target. Clark questioned, maybe we made a mistake? Maybe the target was someone outside the school. No, I think the target is someone on campus. It's possible that we have met before. Gino pinched his chin and said, if you suddenly got a windfall, would you be willing to attend class? Clark imagined this scenario in his mind. He had received $1 million. The first thing he might do was to share the news with his parents and celebrate day and night. Gino shrugged, pointed to the 2nd floor above his head and said, I need to go to the principal's office to check who is not here today. The two came to the principal's office. After explaining their purpose to the principal, the white principal enthusiastically told Gino the list of students who were asking for leave today. There were 18 students in total. After leaving the principal's office, Gino looked at the list and crossed out some names on the paper with a ballpoint pen. After a while, excluding those who are injured, hospitalized, and on personal leave, only these 4 people remain. Gino raised the list in his hand and his eyes fell on 4 names. Marco, Rod, Jenny, Tina. Clark tilted his head and looked at the names on the list. Which one do you think is the target? Well, if I had to choose, I think it would be Tina. Clark said seriously, this girl is a huge fan of Lana. From her dressing style to her tone of voice, Tina is trying her best to imitate Lana and wants to be the popular girl in school. In the corridor not far away, Lana, who was tying her hair, also saw the two of them. Hey, what are you talking about? Lana walked up to the two of them and looked at them with curiosity. She found that when Clark saw her home, his eyes were a little dodgy. Nothing. Clark scratched his cheek and glanced at Gino, who gave Clark a reassuring look. Lana narrowed her eyes slightly. She noticed that Clark would scratch his cheek every time he felt guilty. Gino stretched out his palm and handed Lana a piece of paper. Do you know where Tina's home is? The town of Smallville. Buzz. The SUV was parked in an antique shop. Antiques have collection value, and no matter which country there are people in this business. This is Tina's house. Lana opened the door and stepped out of the car, looking at the antique shop in front of her with a complicated expression. To be honest, having her own imitator actually bothers Lana. A group of people pushed open the antique store, and the wind chimes on the door made a ding-dong sound. This is a medium-sized shop, surrounded by a variety of antique collections. Gino even saw a white jade Guanyin Buddha statue on one of the shelves. Hey, what do you need? Tina's mother, a short woman, walked out of the side door with a smile and came to the three of them. When the woman appeared and stood at the counter, Gino was keenly aware that the woman had glanced at him and Clark dozens of times, her eyes averting and her expression slightly nervous. This woman. Lana showed her intention with a smile. Hello, Mrs. Lauren, we are Tina's classmates. Tina didn't come to class today. Let's check on her. Oh, you mean Tina? Mrs. Lauren smiled awkwardly. She went to her grandmother's house today. Maybe you can come back tomorrow. Mrs. Lauren, do you have many antiques here? Kino interrupted the woman and walked to an antique in the corner. Can you introduce this antique to me? I like it very much. That thing is not for sale. I'm sorry, but you really have to go. Mrs. Lauren rubbed her heart and said, I need to go to the hospital for a physical checkup in a while, so. It was almost clear that they could not stay away, so the three of them left the antique store. After getting on Clark's off-road vehicle, Lana asked with some confusion, Mrs. Lauren seems very nervous. Not only Gino was the only one who noticed Lauren's abnormality, but Lana also noticed something strange about the woman. Clark agreed, yeah, that's weird, having an antique store that doesn't sell antiques and just wants to drive us away. Gino turned to look at the antique shop. His sharp eyes passed through the store door and fell on Mrs. Lauren through the antiques. A 40-year-old woman is wearing black lace underwear. This is so ridiculous. It seems to have been confirmed. Gino secretly thought in his heart, and activated his ability again. Through the flesh and blood meridians, a green skeleton appeared in the young man's pupils. A smile appeared on Gino's lips. I found you. Tina Lauren. Chapter 47 How to use Tina. Antique shop late at night. Da-da-da. The clocks and clocks from ancient times make a crisp sound. Located on the second floor of the store, Tina, who has brown hair, is sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Perhaps out of nervousness, she only lit a few candles in the room to disperse the darkness. At the girl's feet were hundreds of dollar bills. She took a deep breath of the ink-scented air, and her pretty face was filled with confusion. This money? How should I spend it? Should I buy some cosmetics first, eat some food that only rich people can afford, or move away from here and live somewhere else? Click. There was a noise downstairs. Who? Tina narrowed her eyes slightly, stretched out her hands and stuffed the dollar bills scattered on the ground into her school bag. She stood up quickly, her clenched fists making a crackling sound. Since discovering that he is powerful and can change the appearance of others, courage has also grown along with his strength. Tina opened the door and walked out of the house, walking slowly towards the first floor. She walked down the stairs, turned on the lights, and scanned the antique store. Everything was as usual. The antiques that my mother regarded as treasures were quietly placed on the shelves, and the store door was closed with no sign of intrusion. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and walked back to the house with brisk steps. My dollar bills. A happy smile appeared on Tina's face. The money is all hers, and soon, she will start a new life with this money. Tina stuffed the bag with dollar bills under the bed. She lay on her small bed and sighed softly. Too many things had happened in the past few days, and she was a little tired. Soon, Tina's eyelids became heavy and her consciousness became chaotic and fell into a deep sleep. With the sound of breathing, the girl found that she had had a long dream. She dreamed that she was on a beach. The blue sea, the gentle breeze, and a rainbow hanging on the sky not far away. She jumped into the ocean wearing a bathing suit. She was surrounded by countless fish, and everything seemed as beautiful as a fairy tale. However, the next moment, the sky became gloomy. Lightning and strong winds fell from the dark clouds above her head, and an invisible force pulled her down. Sea water poured into her mouth and nose, and the cold water washed over her body. The feeling of suffocation made Tina struggle hard, but her body only felt heavier and heavier. Finally, it seemed that a critical point had been reached, and the girl suddenly opened her eyes. In the dark room, she found a pair of big hands tightly clasping her mouth and nose. She heard a playful laugh. "I thought you would never wake up. There is a second person in my room." Tina tensed up and clenched her fists. Bang! His right fist hit the blurry figure in the darkness hard. But in the next moment, the man seemed to know that she would do this, and easily stretched out his left hand to clasp her wrist. The figure in the darkness shook his head. "Be honest, Tina-san, otherwise I can't guarantee that I will crush your jawbone with my hands." As if to confirm his words, the palm covering Tina's mouth and nose tightened slightly. A sharp pain shot down her chin, and Tina whimpered in horror, nodding slightly to show that she believed it. "Very good." Seeing that the woman was so sensible, his hands gently let go of the girl. Ahem, hoo-hoo. The suffocation of despair faded away, and Tina greedily breathed in the long-lost air. Snapped. The lights in the house were turned on, and the light allowed Tina to see the uninvited guest clearly. The young man with familiar blonde hair and handsome face was leaning on the table next to the lamp, with an expensive camera in his hand. He stared at himself expressionlessly, his blue eyes emotionless, as if he were looking at a tool. "It's you." Tina let out a scream. The other person was the person she pretended to be this morning, Gino Luther. "You, why are you here?" Tina pursed her lips and stared at Gino. She believed in her own power, but the opponent had easily caught her fist just now, which meant that Gino might also be a superhuman. "Because my stuff was stolen." Gino smiled and pointed to the school bag beside the bed. "You robbed us of $50,000. To be honest, he only kills one kind of people, and that's the unlucky ones who threaten his family." However, Gino was also unhappy with the fact that this woman pretended to be herself to rob a bank. "You think? Should I break your hand or your face?" Gino leaned over and slowly approached Tina's cheek. Don't hurt me." Tina's teeth chattered. She felt a terrible killing intent in this man, and the hair on her body stood up. She didn't want to die. "Not hurting you." Gino straightened his back and looked at Tina with a faint look, "But you stole my money and damaged my reputation. You have to pay the price." Gino looked calm. The next second, snapped. The iron hand tightly grabbed Tina's neck and lifted her in the air like a kitten. Ahem. Tina felt her throat hurt as if she had been hit by a dumbbell, and it was difficult to breathe. Her cheeks turned blue due to lack of oxygen. "I'll give you two options now." Gino held out a finger, "Or die here. Or work for me." Tina didn't think about it. Her desire for life made her squeeze out a few words through her teeth without thinking. I choose to." Wise choice. The strength of her hand loosened, and Tina fell on the bed, staring at the sheets with resentment on her face. This bastard Kino was moody and turned against her too quickly. "What do you want from me?" Tina is a very smart woman. Since she cannot resist a powerful person, she can save her life by simply obeying him. For a time, many ideas flashed through the mind of this ardent Lana fan, such as turning himself into Lana or having other women entertain Gino. "Take off your clothes, look at this woman, and become like her." Gino picked up the camera on the table. 10 minutes later. "Follow me." Gino pushed the door open with his hands behind his back and motioned for Tina to follow. The girl bit her lip, rustlingly put on her clothes and followed Gino. Luther Industrial Group, a large fertilizer group with hundreds of employees, is the leading company in this town. Of course no one works in the group late at night, except for the 40-year-old doorman who is responsible for security. Buzz. The silver Bugatti sports car drove into the park. "Here we are." Gino opened the car door and walked towards the factory first. "This is Luther Industries." Tina was a little confused as to why Gino brought her here. But she didn't dare to ask, so she could only follow Gino into the silent factory. The two walked into the elevator, and Tina saw Gino pull out a silver card from his pocket and stick it on the elevator's card reader. Drop. The system verification was successful. Gino stretched out his finger and pressed the elevator on the first floor. The boy turned his head and gave Tina a mysterious smile. Next, you will see the truth about the town. Chapter 48 True Power. The basement is on the first floor. The elevator door opened slowly, and Tina timidly followed Kino out of the elevator. Her eyes widened, unable to believe what she was seeing. This is a vast experimental base. Rows of experimental tanks are neatly arranged in the center of the base. Scientists in white coats are busy in an orderly manner. This place is like an ant's nest, with order revealed in the busyness. Then, what are those two things? Tina looked at the things soaked in the jar in horror. In the dark green nutrient solution, there was a naked, headless corpse with pale skin. The other corpse was as ugly and terrifying as the skin zombie in the legend. Gino sneered, "It's really interesting that you killed your mother yourself and are afraid of two corpses." Tina lowered her head in silence. She wanted to explain that she accidentally pushed her mother downstairs and that it was just an accident. But when the words came to his lips, nothing came out. Lex. Gino found the owner of this laboratory, and his cheap brother's bald head could be seen in the crowd. Lex glanced at Kino, then glanced at Tina next to Kino, raised his eyebrows and said, "Is this the girl?" "Yes, she can turn into anyone she has ever seen." Gino shrugged, "It works for me." Gino's plan is simple. He wants to send this girl to Thalia as an informant. However, just as Gino is worried about Thalia, he also wants to set restrictions on Tina. Tina on the side lowered her head, but kept her ears open, keeping their conversation in mind. She couldn't help but think of the 10 minutes before, when Kino took out the camera and tested her ability to change. From the woman in the camera to Lana and Chloe, the other party stopped the experiment until he could no longer maintain his ability to transform. For a moment, Tina's head was buzzing, and she was a little afraid that the other party would leave her here and become a material in the laboratory. "Then let's get started." Lex waved his hand, and soon two scientists came over holding a needle. "Wait, what are you going to do to me?" I don't want an injection." Tina looked horrified, shaking her head and retreating. "Don't be nervous." Gino glanced at Tina and explained, "This needle contains a gadget called a nanobomb. It will be implanted into your neck along the needle." Gino smiled and said the words in the gentlest tone that made Tina shudder. After that, through the control of the satellite, no matter where you are, just press the button to detonate the bomb in your neck and remove your body. The head and body exploded. After saying that, Gino put his fingers together and spread them out, making a motion like fireworks blooming. To be honest, his idea came from watching a movie called Suicide Squad in his previous life. At that time, Amanda, that old black fat woman, used this trick to control a group of vicious anti-heroes to do things for her. Gino thought this was a good idea, and told Lex about it not long ago after Thalia left. "From now on, whenever you see someone disobedient, put a nanobomb in that person's body, and then..." And his brother lived up to his expectations. Lex made full use of his wisdom, hard work, and extraordinary wealth. He built the nanobomb in just 1 week and connected it to the satellite of the Lex group. Remote control can be achieved anytime and anywhere. Nanobomb. With tears in her eyes, Tina shook her head wildly, "No, I don't want to install this kind of thing in my body, it's too scary." Just imagine, if one day she loses her usefulness or knows too much, Gino can press the button and send her to hell. The feeling that her life was in the hands of others frightened Tina. Haha. Looking at the crying Tina, Gino shook his head with a smile, "It seems you still don't understand." Gino approached Tina, and then slapped her mercilessly. Snapped. The girl stumbled and fell to the ground, and a red mark quickly appeared on her delicate little face. She shook her head and shook her messy hair away. She saw Gino squatting down with a smile on his face, but said in a cold tone, "I'm not talking to you. You discuss the terms, this is an order." This stupid woman didn't even think about it. Was it so easy to get his money? Tina covered her cheek, bit her lip and said, I understand." The girl stood up slowly and watched the two scientists walking towards her. And she was ready to face her next fate. After seeing the horror of this laboratory, Tina didn't feel that Gino would deceive her. "It hurts." Tina rubbed her neck, not sure if it was a psychological effect. Ever since the needle penetrated her skin, she has been feeling a little uncomfortable. Gino ignored the resentful woman and took Tina back to his castle. "Master." The old housekeeper went out to greet him. Gino pointed at the girl. "Her name is Tina. She is my classmate." Choose a room for her on the first floor. She will stay here tonight. Okay. The old housekeeper nodded and left with Tina. Jino also returned to his room, turned on the computer, and sent a message to Thalia in the address book. Alcatraz. In the secret base camp of the Assassin Alliance, in the cold grotto, the leader of the alliance, Lei Xiaogu, stared at the young man in front of him with his eagle eyes. You want to learn martial arts? Why? For myself. The young man said with a calm expression, for something that must be done. Interesting. Lei Xiaogu had not seen such a young man for a long time. He could see a fire burning in this young man's eyes. A ball of flame called revenge. The temperature of the flame was enough to burn everything. This made Lei Xiaogu love talents in his heart. He nodded and sneered, then, go and accept the alliance's entry trial. As long as if you survive, I will personally teach you martial arts. The young man nodded and left. After he left, Lei Xiaogu turned to look at the shadowed corner behind him. What do you think of him? How? A figure walked out of the shadows, and under the moonlight, a pair of thighs slowly walked towards Lei Xiaogu. Move your eyes upward. It's been a long time since we last saw Thalia, and her temperament became even colder. A slight sneer appeared at the corner of her mouth. Her stupid father didn't understand what true strength was. The invulnerable body, the terrifying speed and reflexes, and the desperate sense of oppression. To be honest, Thalia could not see the slightest trace of a strong man in the young man just now, but she knew that she could not disobey her father. So, she smiled and said, I agree with you, leader. After hearing the woman's answer, Lei Xiaogu snorted with satisfaction from his nostrils and waved his daughter to leave. DC Fun Fact: when Bruce was young, he traveled around the world and learned fighting knowledge from Lei Xiaogu of the League of Assassins. Chapter 49 Prom Invitation. Thalia returned to her room. The house located on the dark side of the island gave it a dark style. Thalia turned on the light and squinted slightly to adapt to the light. The woman sat gently on the soft bed, her green eyes staring at a photo full of holes on the wall. The young man in the photo looks handsome, with long blonde hair and a white shirt. He looks like an angel descending from heaven to earth. Ah! Thalia snorted and took out the darts from her pocket. With a swish sound, the cold and sharp edge of the dart penetrated the crotch of the young man in the photo, as if doing so would make her feel better. Despicable thing! Thalia gritted her teeth bitterly. She didn't know her feelings clearly. She was resentful and confused. Ding ding! The phone rang. Thalia opened the phone and saw the content on the phone. The woman frowned slightly and then sneered. Recommend an assistant to me. Thalia snorted coldly and said to herself, you are clearly planning to send an informant to monitor me. Thalia thought about Gino's threat, and finally humiliated herself and chose to agree, and arranged a meeting place with Tina. The first ray of sunshine in the early morning shone into Luther Castle. Gino stood in the bathroom in his pajamas and spit out the foam from his mouth. Master! The butler came not far from Gino with a stack of invitations and said, your memo shows that you will send out a dance party to your classmates during this time. I have prepared hundreds of invitations for you, and the time is set at 10 o'clock tomorrow night. Ah, if you didn't tell me this, I would have forgotten it, butler. Gino smiled and took away the invitation. The invitation letter decorated with gold looks quite grand. Gino glanced out the window. On the grass outside the castle, servants were busy moving tables and chairs. Tomorrow night is destined to be lively. Gino smiled. He was looking forward to the dance tomorrow night. Oh, by the way, butler. Kino turned to look at his butler and said, go and prepare a plane ticket to London, and ask Tina to go to the cafe on number 16 Street in London, and then call this number contact her supervisor. After the exchange with Thalia last night, Gino has already arranged the next trajectory of Tina's life. Your wishes. Buzz. The engine roared and drove the Bugatti sports car into the campus. It's another school day. Kino comes neither early nor late. There are already many students in the school. Good morning, Kino. Chloe suddenly jumped out from behind Kino and gently patted the boy's shoulder. Should I act surprised? Gino turned around and looked at the campus trio. I know I can't scare you. Chloe sighed, and the four of them walked side by side, chatting. Chloe approached Gino mysteriously and lowered her voice. Have you heard? A thief broke into Lauren's antique store last night and found Mrs. Lauren's body in a cabinet. Wow, has the murderer been caught? Kino's expression was as usual. Clark on the side kept staring at Kino, trying to see what he could see from his friend's face. It's a pity that Clark didn't know that the Zeben family were all born actors. The police suspect that Lauren's daughter killed her. Gino shrugged, this is really regrettable news. But I also bring good news. Gino winked at the girl, and then took out a stack of golden invitations from his pocket. These beautifully crafted invitations look great in the early morning sunlight. This is it. Chloe's eyes widened and she quickly reached out and opened one. The girl looked at the words on the paper and read out, Gino Luther sincerely invites you to attend the dance at Luther Castle at 2200 hours on May 24 th. Speaking of the last sentence, Chloe's voice suddenly rose, oh my god, this is a prom invitation. Listening to Chloe's scream, little Black Pete and Clark's eyes also lit up. In the eyes of teenage boys with restless hormones, prom means an invitation to the girl they like. Clark immediately thought of Lana. Clark imagined in his mind that he was holding Lana's hands and dancing on the wide grass of Luther Castle. Gilu. Clark swallowed and immediately put aside Tina's matter. Tina? Is it important for Tina to have Kino's dance party? Chloe's eyes wandered, she took a deep breath to gather her courage, and looked at Kino, so, do you have a dance partner? Chloe's big eyes were full of expectation, and she didn't know what answer she could get. Dance partner? No. Gino shook his head, looked at Chloe, and smiled, want to dance with me? He naturally knows what Chloe is thinking, but Gino has no idea of falling in love right now. Chloe nodded repeatedly, of course. Gino rubbed Chloe's short blonde hair, I'm fine. Peter on the side was hesitant to speak, and after thinking for a while he asked, but Gino, with all these invitations, who do you plan to give them to? To be honest, I don't plan on handing it out myself. Gino shook the pile of invitations in his hand and looked at Clark as if unintentionally, perhaps, I need a few helpers to help me distribute these invitations. It was not without reason that he did this. If he had done it by himself, a group of girls would have come to him in droves and begged for a spot. Gino hated wasting time on such things, so he simply left the limelight to him. A few friends. Beauty? He has been tired of seeing it since he was a child. Beauty is not a scarce resource for top creatures. Ahem, I'm willing to contribute. Clark raised his hand to sign up without hesitation, puffing out his chest to show that he was reliable. And little Black Pete also raised his hand. This is a good opportunity to shine. Why not? Gino divided the invitation letters into two piles and handed them to the two of them, while making a condition, first of all, those who take drugs must not be allowed to enter Luther Castle, as well as the bastards who like school bullying. And bringing your own alcohol and leaves is not allowed. American high school students like to pursue excitement, but Kino doesn't want to see a group of addicts on his castle. Clark and Peter nodded repeatedly, don't worry, Gino, we will strictly control the situation. Gino smiled and said, I'm not worried about Peter, but Clark has no independent opinions and is easily influenced by others. As he spoke, Gino gently bumped Clark with his arm and whispered, perhaps, you can also go to Lana to discuss who can participate in the dance. Good idea. Clark took a deep breath and clutched the golden invitation in his hand tightly. Just like what Gino said, this was a good opportunity for him to increase the distance between him and Lana. Chapter 50 Prom Incident. Smallville Township High School. The news that Kino was going to hold a dance spread like a gust of wind throughout the campus. Hey, did you hear that? That rich second generation is going to have a dance. Oh my god, I can't imagine how busy it must be. Some people say there are expensive food and fine wines there. Almost everyone was discussing the news about the ball. What worries these high school students even more is, who got the invitation? Who is not eligible to attend the dance? In the minds of this group of high school students, campus fame has been linked to prom qualifications. At this moment, Clark and Peter were surrounded by crowds in the campus playground. Please, Pete, I think I need this invitation. The big girl blinked at little Black Pete, looking forward to the pile of invitations. The crowd was noisy, like hundreds of flies swirling around. Oh my god! Little Black Pete couldn't help but wailed, and said to Clark on the side, I now suspect that Gino has already expected this situation, and that's why he let us do this. Pete complained, and he took Chloe shopping for a prom dress. Clark didn't have time to pay attention to Peter's complaints. He was standing with Lana and was responsible for registering the applicants. Even though he was dizzy with work, he felt that the sweetness was bubbling. After parting ways with Gino, Clark immediately found Lana and asked his goddess for help. Lana gave Clark an idea, which was to first count how many people wanted to participate, and then conduct a second screening to confirm the list. "Hey, please, can I sign up?" A gentle voice sounded, and Clark looked up. A slightly obese girl was standing timidly in the crowd. She was wearing a purple shirt and baggy jeans. She lowered her head slightly and squeezed out her double chin. This is undoubtedly a fat girl, and her evasive eyes represent her low self-esteem. "Wow, what did we see?" In the crowd, a high school student holding a basketball sneered, "A whale actually wants to attend a celebrity banquet. What are you doing there? Showing off the whale eating food." Before he finished speaking, the crowd burst into laughter. Obviously, people's joys and sorrows are not the same. "Hey, don't talk about her like that." Pete couldn't stand it, stared at the basketball boy and threatened, "If you make trouble again, I won't send you an invitation." Hearing Pete's threat, the basketball boy shrugged and turned his head, "Wow, I didn't expect you to like fat girls." Ha ha ha. There was another burst of laughter, and this time, the mocking eyes and sneers from the crowd were like sharp swords piercing into the heart of the fat girl. She covered her cheeks, moved her body and left the playground quickly. "Julie." Pete wanted to catch up and ask about the girl, but the next second, a bunch of people gathered around to ask for the invitation. Julie didn't know how she got home. She ran into her room and threw herself on the bed crying. "No one likes me, I'm just a big fat pig." Tears fell down the girl's fat cheeks and wet the pillow. It seemed that she was tired of crying. Julie sat up slowly, her eyes full of determination. "No, I want to lose weight." She rushed down from the room and came to her vegetable garden. The girl knelt down and pulled out some green vegetables from the garden. She has a plan in mind to juice these vegetables to replace the food she eats every day. "These nasty rocks." The girl holds the green stones mixed in the dirt and throws them into the trash can. After doing all this, Julie walked into the kitchen holding vegetables. Buzz. The juicer blends the vegetables and crushes them into a thick green juice. Julie took a deep breath, looked at the astringent green water in the glass, and drank it all with her eyes closed. She smacked her lips, wiped the vegetable leaf residue from the corner of her mouth, and murmured to herself, "I hope this can make me lose weight." Another early morning, fat girl Julie woke up from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes, put on her shoes, and started the first thing she did every day when she woke up, weighing herself. She stepped lightly on the scale, and as the red number on the scale changed, Julie was surprised to find that she had actually lost weight. "This is amazing." The girl was a little excited and walked to the mirror. She gently lifted up her pajamas. Her originally bloated belly slimmed down at a speed visible to the naked eye, and even a charming vest line appeared. The ugly double chin also disappeared, and the thick thighs also lost weight. This is amazing." Julie clenched her fists excitedly, and she was intoxicated by the feeling of losing weight. Then she began to wonder why she had lost weight. "By the way, it's that glass of vegetable juice." Julie's eyes lit up and she rushed to the first floor with bare feet. If I lose weight, I might be eligible to get an invitation to the prom from Pete. Luther Castle. On the table. "You're having a dance tonight?" Lex put a piece of fried egg in his mouth. "Of course, this castle is too deserted, it should be lively." Gino raised his eyebrows, took a sip of his favorite milk, and asked, "Do you want to come to participate? I can send you an invitation letter." "Forget it." Lex picked up the dinner paper and wiped the corners of his mouth elegantly. "I plan to set up a local agricultural alliance to reverse the company's losses and shut up the vampire." "That's right." Lex seemed to have thought of something and stared at Gino. "Have you found a dance partner?" "Yes, a girl from the local high school." Lex smiled and said, "Lucky girl. So, half of the 200 invitations have been sent out." In the school, Gino put his arms around Clark's neck and said in a teasing tone, "Let me think about it, is there Lana on the invitation list?" "Hey, Gino, don't say that." Clark hesitated and did not respond directly. "Lana has such a warm and cheerful personality, she deserves to be included in the banquet." While the two were talking, Chloe and Peter popped out of nowhere. "You can't believe it." Chloe looked excited. She glanced at the hopeless little black Pete and said, "Someone actually likes Pete too." "Hey!" Peter screamed strangely, "I'm also very good, Okay. Oh? Which girl? Jino raised an eyebrow. Did you give her an invitation? Here, give it. Pete rubbed his cheek and said, I can't believe my eyes. The girl named Julie was still very fat yesterday, but this morning when she asked me if I could be her dance partner, that girl, I've lost a whole lot of weight. Like a fat beauty. Chloe held her hands and said what she wanted to say for Peter, but the girl's eyes were full of doubts. But I can't think of anything that can make a person lose weight in just one night. Clark didn't have so many worries, he just smiled and patted Peter on the shoulder. Not bad, congratulations. Chapter 51 Good words are hard to persuade. On campus. What do you think about this? Chloe looked at Jino. It's what you think. Jino narrowed his eyes. A fat girl weighing more than 100 kilograms lost weight in just one night. Excluding the possibility of liposuction surgery, the other party was probably also affected by kryptonite and gained some strange abilities. Clark didn't think this was strange. Well, maybe you are overthinking it. That girl just took some weight loss pills. It's like you're attributing all the strange things in the town to the meteor shower. Chloe frowned dissatisfied and retorted, my theory has basis. This is a very interesting theory, but you don't want to believe it. Most people thought her claims were nonsense, which made Chloe angry. I think her theory is very interesting. Jino put his hands in his pockets and glanced at Clark. Do you still remember where you were during the meteor shower? Clark lowered his head, pursed his lips and shook his head. I don't know, my parents had not adopted me when the meteor shower happened. Jino clapped his hands and said with a smile, I remember this very clearly. On the day the meteorite struck, Lex and I happened to be in the town with my father. The first meteorite hit near me and Lex. He lost all his hair due to the impact of the meteorite. Clark pursed his lips. Sure enough, was it his arrival that caused these tragedies? Immediately, Clark looked at Jino's arm. Maybe Jino's strength was also given by the meteorite? So. Jino gave his own judgment, there must be something weird about that Julie. Hey, I think she's very hot now. Pete was a little dissatisfied. He finally found a dance partner, but his friends all thought his partner was a monster. Personal advice, Peter. Jino glanced at Xiaohe and said, it's best to keep a distance from that girl. Hey, so you are here. Not far away, when a girl named Julie saw the four people, her eyes lit up. She ran towards this side happily, but then she covered her stomach with a painful expression. However, the pain seemed to only last for a second. The smile returned to the girl's face and she walked towards the four people. No, it should be said that it was Peter among the four. Jino glanced at Julie. Although he had never heard of this girl's name, his super memory quickly helped Jino recall Julie's previous appearance in his mind. That was when I glanced at this fat girl in a geometry class. At that time, she was bloated, her eyes were evasive, and her whole person was full of unconfidence and fear. His eyes fell on the girl's face, which was neither fat nor thin, and her two slightly chubby thighs, which made Jino confirm his judgment even more. Kino. Clark calmly approached his friend and whispered in Jino's ear, will she be like Grey? Obviously, Clark, who has suffered a lot, has matured and no longer regards society and human psychology as being as beautiful as in fairy tales. Jino patted Clark on the shoulder, get ready, Clark. Julie didn't pay attention to Jino's meaningful expression. She just looked at little Black Pete with excitement, held her little hand and said, are you free at noon? I want you to accompany me to pick out a dress. Ceremony, dress. Xiaohe glanced at the girl's tall peaks, swallowed his saliva and agreed without hesitation, of course, I am willing to help. Pit's performance made Jolie chuckle and said, let's go then. The girl took Peter away, and the two walked out of the campus talking and laughing. Kino, we should stop her. Clark was a little anxious. Peter was his friend, and he didn't want his friend to turn into a mummy. I have already persuaded him. Jino shrugged and said with an indifferent expression, but the little black prince doesn't seem to want us to participate in this matter. So. Jino patted Clark on the shoulder and said, the best way is not to meddle in other people's business. Respect the fate of others and let go of helping others, well, that's right. But. Clark wanted to say something more, but Jino had already left with Chloe. I have to go take a look. Clark raised his legs and planned to follow Pete to protect his friend's life. However, another voice sounded from behind, Clark. Where did you go? It's Lana's voice. Clark's eyes lit up, and he calmly retracted the leg he had taken out. He turned around, and Lana, who was wearing pink short sleeves and black sweatpants, had her hands on her hips and stared at Clark dissatisfied. "Clark, we made an appointment to go to my house at noon to help me choose a dress, you won't forget it, right?" As she spoke, Lana tugged on her long ponytail hair and said, "What hairstyle should I wear for the prom?" "I think so," Clark said with a firm look and a smile on his face, "I can give you some advice." Clark patted his chest and said, "I often watch my father help my mother choose hairstyles at home. I have experience in this aspect." "Well, as for Pete?" Clark comforted himself and thought, since the girl likes Peter so much, there should be nothing wrong with her. Small town dress shop. Pitt followed Jolie into the store with great interest. Because of the prom, many high school students can also be seen here choosing their dresses for tonight. "Which one do you think is better for me to wear?" Jolie and Pitt walked through the dazzling array of dresses. Pete thought for a while and gave a perfect answer, "Well, you look very beautiful in whatever you wear. I need the one that suits me best." Julie's lips curled up, obviously Pitt's compliment made her very happy. Pete scratched his cheek, glanced at the clothes rack, and pointed at one of the sexy red dresses. "Okay, then why not try red?" The girl followed Peter's hand and looked at the red dress. She felt extremely emotional. She used to only be able to look up at these beautiful skirts, but now she can wear them. "Then, wait for me here." Julie stretched out her finger and lightly swiped Pitt's lips. When she turned to leave, she didn't forget to turn her head and wink at Pitt. She carried the red dress and walked towards the fitting room. Went around the corner through the crowds. Giloo! There was a strong feeling of hunger in her abdomen again and Julie couldn't help but cover her abdomen. "Wow, who is this?" A male voice sounded above her head. Julie raised her head with difficulty and found that the person who came was actually the guy who mocked her in the playground yesterday. For a moment, a vicious thought arose in Julie's heart. The young man didn't notice the burning hatred flashing in the girl's eyes. His wet eyes swept over Julie's body. "I didn't expect you to lose so much weight. It's so surprising." "Haha, what a coincidence." Julie immediately suppressed the hunger in her belly, made a perfect gesture, gently shook the red dress on her hand with one hand, stared at the boy and said, "You want to see me up close? This dress? Thanks to the boss of Don Don for the 100-point reward. I have been busy these days and forgot to read the background news, you will forgive me, QAQ. Chapter 52 Missing Pete. Small town clothing store. So funny. The young man gently sniffed the perfume on Julie's clothes. "Seriously, did you go to the gym?" Inside the room, the young man looked at Julie's figure and gently hugged the girl's waist. "Yeah, I didn't think I could do it." Julie suppressed the discomfort in her heart, feeling the sweet words of yesterday's bully, and said in a faint tone, "But I'm a little hungry now, can you do me a favor?" "What?" The bully mistakenly thought that the girl was trying to stir up emotions with him, and said in a ridiculous bubble voice. "What do you want me to help you with?" "It's very simple, just a small favor." Julie rubbed her chin and said, "That's your body." "What? My body?" At this moment, the young man slowly closed his eyes, with a look of enjoyment on his face as he thought crookedly, but in the scene he couldn't see, Julie's expression became more and more gloomy, and her mouth was also tightening to an unimaginable degree. Stretching, opening its mouth like a python with its mouth wide open. Thump! The woman suddenly pressed down on the young man's shoulders, and her originally neat teeth instantly turned into sharp teeth, which pierced into the young man's flesh like a straw. Click! A little sunlight shines through the cracks on the wall. In the reflection, Julie keeps raising her head and greedily swallowing the unlucky man's body fat. "My neck!" The boy let out a scream, but it was muffled by the noise of the crowd outside. Immediately, silence returned to the small cloakroom. "Hey, how about this dress?" The radiant Julie walked out of the cloakroom. She raised her long hair and turned in a circle imitating the movements of a ballet dancer. "Awesome!" Pete grinned, and the girl's graceful figure made his heart beat faster. "I'm so looking forward to tonight's dance." "Yes." Julie looked at the fitting room with a ghostly look. "I'm also looking forward to the dance tonight." At night, the originally peaceful Luther castle was brightly lit. The old butler is indeed a ruthless person who has been serving the Luther family since he was 20 years old. A gorgeous red carpet is laid from the entrance of the castle to the venue. It was 21:30 in the evening, half an hour before the dance started, and many men and women in formal attire had already gathered outside the castle. Everyone. The old butler cleared his throat, held a microphone and said, "Welcome everyone to Luther Castle. Now, please invite your dance partner to walk on the red carpet to participate in this wonderful night." After the words fell, the gate of the castle slowly opened. The first couple walking on the red carpet were slightly nervous, but they still suppressed their nervousness and entered the venue. More men and women walked together on the red carpet and walked into the venue under the guidance of attendants. On the large lawn in front of the castle, tables, chairs, and food have already been arranged. Waiters were passing through the crowd carrying trays. Most of the invited guests had never attended such a formal party, and many of them seemed a little reserved. They either adjusted their ties from time to time, or held their red wine glasses in an artificial manner to show their elegance. Even when speaking, everyone only dared to lower their voices for fear of appearing rude. A black stage was set up in the middle of the lawn, with 2 speakers and music equipment placed on it, in preparation for the next performance. However, most people have a question in their minds, that is, where is the host of this banquet? Where has the owner of this castle gone? Is the question on everyone's mind. He came. I don't know who shouted, and as several searchlights on the top floor of the castle lit up to illuminate the red carpet, Gino and Clark, who were tall in black suits, walked into the venue with their dance partners. However, compared to Gino's confidence and calmness, poor Clark was like a stiff robot taking long strides, almost dragging down his female companion Lana at such a fast speed. "Clark!" Gino lowered his voice and commanded, "Learn my pace, have a good attitude and don't be nervous." "Yes, Clark, I will take you and follow my rhythm." Lana also lowered her voice to comfort her dance partner. After listening to what Gino and the goddess said, Clark took a deep breath to calm down, and walked into the venue with Lana under the gaze of everyone. Everyone. Gino let go of Chloe and walked into the black stage alone. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were watching him, and at this moment, all the attention was focused on him. The boy picked up the microphone and said leisurely, "Now, please enjoy the dance tonight." As soon as the words fell, light and melodious dance music sounded. Under the guidance of Gino, these restless young men and women soon let themselves go completely. Regardless of whether they knew how to dance or not, they all held the hands of their dance partners and danced happily. "Hoo, I really didn't expect that your dancing skills are so good." Chloe was held by Gino's hand and spun around. It wasn't until the music stopped that Chloe gasped to adjust her breathing. "Generally." Gino smiled. He would not tell Chloe what he had learned during his miserable childhood. Not only fighting skills, but also dance music. Anything related to elegance, his family would force him to learn. Gino couldn't help but cover his forehead as his peripheral vision glanced at Clark and Lana. Compared with his own ease, Clark's performance can be described as a fool's errand. Either he stepped on Lana's shoes, or he almost tripped himself. It can only be said that Clark still has a long way to go before he can successfully catch up with the goddess. "By the way, why didn't you see Pitt and Jolie?" Chloe looked around and said worriedly, "They won't have an accident, right?" "Who knows?" Gino put on an indifferent attitude, thought for a while and said, "If you are worried about Peter, you can ask my butler, he has a registration list there." "Kino, can I dance with you?" When a girl saw Gino and Chloe separated, she immediately ran forward and extended an invitation. Gino smiled, "Of course, why not?" As the music played, Gino stepped onto the dance floor with his new dance partner. Chloe glanced at Gino, who had a normal attitude, and then at Clark, who was indulging in a happy time with Lana. The girl sighed and walked towards the old housekeeper in the castle. As a friend, she didn't want to see anything happen to Pete. Chloe stopped the old butler and said, "Sir, is there Pete Carlson's name on the banquet list?" "This lady." The old housekeeper pushed up his glasses, glanced at the list in his hand, shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, this name is not on the list. Maybe this friend of yours didn't come to the ball." Listening to the old housekeeper's words, Chloe thought to herself that it was terrible. The last thing she wanted to see happened. Pitt didn't show up to the ball, and neither did Jolie. "No, I have to go take a look. Thank you to reader 14551471177274122224 for the 100-point reward. I love you so much. P.S. Posted late because the chapter was reviewed and took a long time to change. Chapter 53 Panic Pete. Julie's house. The 2-story building located on the west side of the town sits quietly in the night. Ahem. Peter, who was wearing a black suit, looked at the watch in his hand anxiously. The pointer pointed at 22:10, 10 minutes had passed since Kino's dance party. Hey, Julie, are you in there? Pete rubbed the suit tie around his neck. He even rented an expensive suit for tonight's date. Here it comes. Julie's voice sounded from behind the door. She was wearing a red dress and opened the door with a smile. Wow, you look so beautiful tonight. Xiao He looked at the tall girl and her long legs. It was no exaggeration to say that she looked like a catwalk model. Peter held out the flowers in his hand. This is for you. Thank you. Julie's eyes lit up and she took the flowers from Pitt's hand. This was the first time someone had given her flowers in such a long life. As he spoke, Xiao He opened his left arm. What are we waiting for? Let's go. Thanks. Julie covered her mouth and chuckled, put one hand around Pitt's arm, and the two walked towards the car. Julie was smiling, but the next second, she felt severe pain in her abdomen, which made her frown. The arm that was originally holding Xiao He unconsciously let go. You look a little bad, what happened? Pitt turned around in surprise, looked at Jolie who looked in pain, and asked with concern, do I need to take you to the hospital? Julie took a deep breath. Suppressing the hollowness in his stomach, a pair of eyes greedily glanced at little dark Pete's thick lips, as if looking at two hot dogs. Ridiculous thoughts emerged from the bottom of my heart, he looked tempting and delicious. She swallowed, but soon Julie was startled by her thoughts. What am I doing? Pete is a good guy and he stood up for me. I can't hurt him. Julie clenched her fists and lost control. Pete, you are very good to me, but I feel a little uncomfortable. She turned around and ran towards the house, still holding the flowers that Peter gave her, but the girl's voice was obviously crying, you are a good person, so leave quickly. She didn't want to hurt the only boy who was good to her. Wait a minute, Julie. Pete looked helplessly as the girl ran further and further away, and his already dark cheeks became even darker. He sighed, what a strange girl. Now it's okay, my dance partner has run away and I can't go to the dance. After all, arriving late to the dance is bound to attract a lot of attention. The thought of a group of people finding him without a dance partner was worse than killing Pete. Well. Peter sighed, being betrayed by the girl in front of him, which made him very sad. The boy muttered, I want to go home and order some fried chicken with watermelon for a big meal. Pete? A call interrupted Peter's contemplation. Xiao He raised his head and found that Chloe was sticking her head out of the driver's seat of Clark's SUV. The girl waved to Peter with a nervous look on her face, come here quickly. Just 5 minutes ago, a big news broke in the small-town reporter circle. High school student Genos was found dead in Bayless gift and clothing store. The cause of death was the loss of fat all over his body. This made Chloe even more sure that her presumably, Julie must be abnormal. What happens? Seeing Chloe's solemn expression, Peter quickly ran to the girl to ask about the situation. And listening to Chloe's story, Peter's dark face gradually turned pale with fear, and his voice trembled, you mean Genos became a mummy? Pete recalled the scene at noon in his mind. He and Julie did see Genos while browsing the gift shop. The two of them were chatting about the situation, not noticing at all that on the second floor of Julie's house not far away, a pair of hateful eyes were staring at this scene. Julie held her stomach tightly with her right hand, and the painful hunger was burning her reason. Chloe. Looking at the girl talking to Peter, Julie's face was filled with jealousy. The girl's cheeks gradually twisted, her voice became shrill and terrifying, and dense black hair sprouted up and down her skin covering her whole body. The originally slender arms also twisted and deformed at this moment, and gradually grew sharp claws. 2 gaps were torn in the back, and a pair of hideous fleshy wings dripping with pus stretched out, almost filling the entire room. Ouch! The monster, which looked like a large bat, let out a strange scream. The ear-piercing sound shattered the glass and spread out the window, exploding along the air throughout the street. The horrifying sound gave Peter goosebumps all over his body, and he turned his head to look in the direction of the sound. In the night, a huge bat monster was squatting on the window balcony and staring at him. My God! Pete let out a scream, and his racial superiority instantly exploded. He jumped into the car and rolled onto the seat. He screamed and urged Chloe, did you see that monster? Hurry, drive quickly, hurry up, run. What is that? Chloe cursed, raised her middle finger towards Pete, and complained, I told you damn well, and Gino also warned you that something is wrong with Julie, and it turned out like this. While scolding the lecherous Pete, Chloe quickly put into gear and stepped on the accelerator. Thanks to the excellent performance of the off-road vehicle given to Clark by Kino, the violent off-road vehicle roared and drove the two of them towards the road in the distance. Everything around him was reversing rapidly. Chloe pressed the accelerator to the bottom and continued to increase the speed of the car. The off-road vehicle made a deafening roar on the silent road. Inside the car. It's still chasing. Peter didn't even dare to look back, he only dared to look at the monster's hands and feet in the rearview mirror and chased it from a distance behind the car. What should we do? Pit's voice was now filled with tears. If he could do it all over again, he would slap himself hard twice to stop him from agreeing to Julie's invitation. Chloe turned the direction of the SUV and drove it towards the highway, while angrily scolding Peter, "Idiot, call Gino and Clark. In this situation, only Gino and Clark can save them." Oh, that's right, look for Gino and Clark. Only then did Peter realize that he had two mysterious friends. Judging from Gino's dull expression when he observed Mrs. Ted's body, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Pulling the phone out of his pocket with trembling hands, Pete stared at the rearview mirror and muttered, "Hurry up, hurry up. He has never even been in love, and he doesn't want to die. Pete, hurry up." Chloe screamed. In the rearview mirror, she saw the monster getting further and further away from the off-road vehicle. It simply waved its fleshy wings and slowly flew into the air, opening its sharp fangs. Teeth let out a terrifying scream, "Pete, you are mine." Chapter 54 Give you the big wood you like to eat. Highway 5 in Smallville Township. In the dark night, you can't see your fingers. Many ravens in the green woods on both sides of the highway emit whining sounds from time to time, making the atmosphere even more frightening. A beam of light dispels the darkness. Buzz. The red SUV roared down the road, causing a lot of ravens to quack. Whoosh. Before the poor group of ravens could recover, another huge black shadow passed by. Sensing the danger, the ravens flapped their wings and dispersed. Inside the off-road vehicle, the wind was howling and blowing from both sides. Chloe could only yell at the top of her voice to Pete, "Call Kino." Clark doesn't have time to answer. The girl knows that whenever Clark meets Lana, his IQ will drop. And time is precious. Between Clark and Gino, Chloe chose Gino without hesitation. Because her past experience told her that Gino was more reliable. After all, Gino never seemed to like a girl, and it was impossible for him to be distracted by a woman and not answer the phone. Peter's trembling fingers finally turned to Gino's phone. While dialing, Peter's peripheral vision scanned the dense forest behind him, and a group of ravens scattered and flew around. "That thing is still following us." A look of despair appeared on Pete's face. He put down the phone and shivered and took out paper and pen from the storage box of the off-road vehicle. Chloe pursed her lips, and while controlling the off-road vehicle to accelerate, she looked at Peter curiously, "What are you doing?" Write a suicide note." Peter sniffed and asked Chloe, "Do you want me to write it for you too?" Chloe's face turned dark, "Shut your mouth, Pete. We won't die here." Chloe gritted her teeth. "Why?" "Because I believe in Kino." Luther Castle. Gino, who had received hope from Chloe, was sitting on a chair eating snacks on the plate. Well, girls come to him to dance every minute, and Gino can only refuse these girls with the excuse of having a meal. "Master." The old housekeeper walked over quickly, holding a touch-tone mobile phone in his hand. "I have your phone number. The caller is your high school classmate, Pete." "Thank you." Gino thanked the old butler. With a smile on his face, he took the phone and answered, "Hello? Peter, where are you and your dance partner?" Peter on the other end of the phone was so excited that tears filled his eyes when he heard Kino's voice. "Thank God you finally answered the phone." Pete shed tears of excitement, fear, and said quickly, "Come and save us, Kino, my dance partner turned into a bat monster and is chasing me. It looks like it's going to eat me." "Bat monster?" Gino slowly stood up, secretly thinking that just as he had guessed, Peter's dance partner might have been transformed into a person with supernatural powers by kryptonite. This is a good experimental material. Gino remembers that Lex's research is just short of the last experimental subject. If he can capture it alive, it may be helpful to the Cheap Brothers' research. "Where are you now?" On the other end of the phone, Gino heard Chloe's voice. The girl shouted at the top of her lungs, "On Highway 5 in Smallville, we are leaving the town soon." Before the girl could finish her words, an unpleasant noise came from the phone, followed by the frightened screams of Peter and Chloe and the harsh friction between the vehicle and the road as it tipped over. Jino stood up and walked towards the outside of the manor. At the same time, he ordered the butler, "Butler, the dance ends at 12 o'clock. If I don't come back, you will organize the end." "Okay, young master." The butler bowed slightly and nodded, watching Jino walk around the crowded crowd to a remote corner. The next second, his young master disappeared instantly, as if someone had erased this place with an eraser. The world is wiped out, and it is as if there is a bug in the world and people disappear out of thin air. Witnessing this magical scene with his own eyes, the old housekeeper was slightly startled but then regained his composure, turned around and walked away. The most important thing for him to work in the Luther family for more than 20 years is his strict mouth and good sense. Breathe, breathe. At a speed that no one could catch, Kino was like a bolt of lightning speeding through the forest. Bang bang! In order to save time, Jino did not avoid the trees in the dense forest. Like a ruthless beast, his steel body easily smashed into the trees and created a silhouette of a human figure in the trunk. Finally, choosing to take a shortcut, Jino arrived at the highway that Chloe mentioned in just 1 second. Jino looked around and soon saw the scene not far away. An ugly bat monster was lying on an overturned off-road vehicle. The tattered red dress on his body proved that this guy should be considered a human before he mutated. At this moment, the monster was slapping the off-road vehicle with its big claws, and under the off-road vehicle, there was Peter screaming in terror and Chloe in panic. The scarlet eyes were full of madness, and countless saliva dripped down the monster's mouth and hit the ground, emitting bursts of unpleasant smell. Just by looking at the monster, Jino easily deduced that the monster had no basic reason, and was only driven by madness and hunger. Clark must be devastated to see this. Jino smiled and shook his head. The paint on the car was a big deal. Focus on the monster again. However, it has become so ugly. Is there any hope of changing it back? Jino didn't feel there was hope, suppressed the thoughts in his heart, and the young man hugged a big tree next to him with his hands. Get up! Jino's expression didn't change and he gently pulled up. Boom! The huge tree with its roots rises from the ground and is easily held in the arms of a creature dozens of times smaller than it. Whoosh! Jino twisted his waist to rotate the giant tree, and the branches and leaves made sounds in the wind. This considerable movement successfully attracted the monster's attention. Roar! It growled its mouth and let out a roar. It looked at the little man waving a big tree not far away. The monster's eyes were full of confusion. But the next second... Whoosh! Jino suddenly let go of the big tree, and the big tree that lost traction suddenly shot out like a cannonball under the blessing of inertia. The distance of just a few hundred meters passed in an instant, and when the monster saw the approaching giant tree clearly and wanted to flap its wings to escape, the giant tree was already approaching the monster. Boom! Without any suspense, the giant tree hit the monster, and the remaining power drove the monster and the giant tree to fly off the highway, hitting the dense forest on the side of the road and kicking up a large amount of dust. Jino stared at the dense forest, his handsome face full of disdain. In the dense forest, the bat monster was easily pushed down by the giant tree and could not move under the tree. It could only keep roaring with its mouth open. This made Jino's evaluation of this monster even lower. Although these three guys, Jerome, Gray, and Watt, were useless, they all knew how to think with their heads. However, the opponent they encountered today was an out-and-out useless monster. Brain beast. Jino sighed, walked slowly to the off-road vehicle and said, there is no sense of accomplishment at all in defeating something like this. Chapter 55 New Copy Card. This is really interesting. Jino clasped the car body and pulled gently. With a boom sound, the huge off-road vehicle was straightened by the boy, and the four wheels returned to the cement road. There were inevitable bumps in the process, and Pete and Chloe, who were kowtowing, let out painful screams. It hurts. Chloe covered her red and swollen forehead and mouth. She resisted the desire to vomit and pushed open the car door and walked out of the car. She looked at Kino with her big eyes and said apologetically, I'm sorry, Kino, I ruined your party. Ah, there's no need to apologize, we're friends, right? Jino smiled. It was just a simple task for him to help Chloe, the important thing was the experimental material. Just friends. Chloe's expression was gloomy. Looking at the young man with a calm face, he felt some indescribable loss in his heart. After witnessing Kino's magical power tonight, Chloe has already erected a high wall in her heart. Perhaps she and Kino were not from the same world from the beginning. People are isolated into two worlds. Perhaps the only one who can accompany him to the end is the equally mysterious Clark, right? Gino didn't pay attention to Chloe's emotions. At this time, little Black Pete climbed out of the off-road vehicle with trembling legs. Even his proud dark thick lips turned pale and purple. It seemed that tonight's adventure was not a good experience for Peter. Oh my god, tonight was a nightmare. Peter swallowed, glanced at Kino with odd eyes, and then glanced at the monster struggling in the dense forest. He asked what he wanted to ask in his heart, Kino, what should we do next? What to do? Gino sneered, picked up a branch from the ground and said, I don't know how you will react if a mouse enters your house. But anyone who is not an animal rights activist will generally kill rats that break into their homes. Gino gently opened the branch in his hand and made it into a rough wooden thorn. He turned and smiled at Chloe, do you know how the church in the Middle Ages killed people they thought were witches and vampires? They would tie people to crosses and pierce their hearts with wooden thorns. Gino held the wooden thorn and gently threw it in his hand. The young man looked at Peter with a smile, if you want to watch how I kill your vampire bride, you can come with me. Pete shook his head quickly and said, no, 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 I don't want it. Just kidding, that monster kept shouting his name. Gino was not surprised either. Perhaps this was the answer he wanted. The young man stretched out his slender index finger and pointed at the off-road vehicle, then, you two drive away. Peter pursed his lips and took the frustrated Chloe to the off-road vehicle. The damaged off-road vehicle spit out large amounts of black smoke from the rear exhaust pipe. But it still drove slowly and steadily towards the distance. After watching the off-road vehicle disappear from his sight, Gino chuckled, slowly walked towards the bat monster, and took out his mobile phone to call Lex. Lex, we caught another interesting thing. Yeah, you need to bring a bigger cage. After hanging up the phone, Gino also walked up to the bat monster, staring at the monster that was pressed by a giant tree and unable to move, and could only hold its head high and growl at him and whispered, how can dead materials be useful with living materials? With a smile on his lips, Gino raised the wooden thorn and stabbed the monster's arm hard. Pfft! Blood mixed with smelly pus was scattered on the leaves. Ignoring the wailing monster, Gino quickly fixed the monster's limbs with 4 wooden stakes. Under the cold moonlight, the bat monster's broken red dress looks particularly bright and poignant. After all, I didn't have the chance to go to the dance I wanted to go to the most. And it can be expected that it can only stay in the dark underground experimental base for the rest of its life. The basement level of Luther Chemical Plant. Almost half of the world's top biologists gathered outside the huge transparent glass cabinet to rub the irrational monster. They are all scientists hired by the Luther Group with high salaries, responsible for assisting Lex in conducting a cross-air research. At the front of the crowd, Lex put his hands behind his back and stared fervently at the bat monster lying on the ground devouring the fat of a live cow. Seriously, you gave me a big surprise. You actually caught living material. Lex turned around and looked at his brother sitting on the couch. When he received the news, Lex immediately dropped what he was doing and arranged for professionals to take away the experimental body as quickly as possible. A corner not far away. There is naturally a place for resting in the laboratory. Gino put his hands on the sofa and raised his head to stare at the ceiling above his head. Yes, living material. Gino answered perfunctorily, brother cheap, but he was checking the system interface. After several weeks of daily interaction with Clark and friendly communication with Talia, his points can be redeemed for a new duplicate card. His mind moved slightly, and the next second, a familiar golden card was sandwiched between Gino's 2 fingers. The warm card was full of complicated and luxurious patterns, which looked mysterious and weird. Gino is thinking about where he should use this card. Copy the bat monster's ability? Don't be kidding, this kind of garbage creature can be crushed to death with just 1 finger. Lex, when do your experiments start? Gino glanced at the large petri dishes in the laboratory and had some ideas in his mind. Originally, it still took several years to overcome some technical problems, but now we have this guy. Lex turned around, reached out and patted the glass cabinet, causing the bat monster to roar with bared teeth. He continued, I believe I will start my first experiment during this time. Not bad news. Gino flipped his fingers and the golden card disappeared. He was already looking forward to what surprises Lex's experiment would bring. Early in the morning. As soon as Kino drove into the school in his sports car, the two policemen guarding the school gate came forward with warm smiles on their faces. Mr. Kino. Gino glanced at the two policemen. Was it because of yesterday's murder? We received a call from the father of Mr. Julie Moss. He said that his daughter had not come home overnight and that there appeared to be damage to the home. One of the policemen said cautiously, according to the information the police have, she is going to your manor to attend a dance that night. Another policeman continued, did you see her at the dance? Unexpectedly, Gino smiled gently and said, no, I have never met Miss Julie Moss, and neither have the guests last night. The two policemen nodded, I'm sorry to bother you. It was Julie's father who attributed his daughter's disappearance to you. The old guy seems to be crazy and has been pestering us to ask you about the situation. Who is Mr. Kino? How could a rich second generation who sponsored a small town police department with tens of thousands of dollars a year kidnap Moss's ugly and fat daughter? Gino smiled, shrugged, and said, it's okay, I can understand Mr. Moss's sadness. The two policemen nodded and bowed, well, I wish you a happy day. Gino waved his hand and motioned for the two policemen to get out. As for Julie's father? Gino felt that it was better to let this middle-aged man think that his daughter was just missing. Tell a man the truth and he may go crazy because he cannot accept it. The daughter who was originally fair and chubby turned into a bat monster with no sense and only madness. It's better to hide this kind of thing. Today's music, some people are really hard to criticize. Clark saved the protagonist's brother, and the protagonist gave Clark a car in return. Even if he gave Clark some love advice, he was criticized. I wonder if the protagonist of Grey's episodes was not merciless when he taught Clark a lesson. Is this a normal way of getting along between friends? How come you have become a licker of gratitude? It's really a big stage on the internet, you can come if you are crazy enough. As long as there is a little bit of kindness, the protagonist is a dog licker, a virgin bitch, it must be dark and cruel, right? Chapter 56 Experiment. Gino originally planned to attend school for one day. Unfortunately, before he reached the teaching building, his plan was interrupted by a phone call. The experiment is about to begin, you'd better come here quickly. Lex on the other end of the phone sounded very excited, and just asked Gino to come over quickly before hanging up the phone. It's really efficient. Gino smiled helplessly. The cheap guy never did anything sloppily, he could only act quickly. At this time, Gino saw the campus trio coming from the west side. Kino, why are you standing here? Chloe, with her hands behind her back, still looking careless, tilted her head and looked at Kino, you look happy. The corners of the young man's mouth curled up, and he seemed to be in a good mood. Can't I be happy anymore? Gino smiled, patted Chloe's shoulder, and his eyes fell on Clark and Peter, who looked ugly behind the girl. Gino glanced at Clark, who had a sullen expression, and guessed that the other person was probably a little depressed because Chloe had scratched off the paint on his off-road vehicle. But Gino is in no mood to enlighten Clark now. He has to go to the factory to participate in the experiment. If the stupid old man's experiment fails, he can also help. Gino withdrew his gaze, looked at Chloe and said, Chloe. My company has something to do, so please ask for leave for the teachers. Take leave. Chloe wanted to ask what she wanted to do, but she still suppressed the idea in her heart and nodded, okay. Separating from the three of them, Kino drove all the way to the factory in a silver supercar. Walk into the elevator with ease and press the button for the first floor. As the elevator opened, the huge laboratory came into view again. But what is different from before is that this huge space is full of busy people. Countless expensive-looking biological equipment are scattered throughout the base, connected by countless pipes, and in the center of the base sits a huge solution tank. Mr. Gino, the president has asked you to come over. A researcher ran over panting. What is Lex doing? Gino looked at the biological can. Inside, the green liquid was soaking a humanoid creature with black hair and a tall figure. If you look closely, you can see that his face is about 40 to 50% similar to Clark. Gino didn't know how Lex got Clark's DNA, but the cheap guy did, and judging from the development of this clone, the experiment might have started a long time ago. The experimenter's explanation interrupted Gino's observation. He said, Mr. Lex is making final adjustments. We plan to remove the power of the entire town to run this biological equipment so that those magical stones can further stimulate the experimental subjects. The body transforms its genes to activate biological abilities. Stop, stop, stop. Gino interrupted the researcher's story and sighed, take me there. Damn it! These scientists have a set of professional terms, but if you understand it simply, it means that energy is needed to drive the equipment to operate, thereby activating the ability to clone humans. It's annoying for science students to have to use professional terminology in a few simple sentences. The two walked side by side. The researcher led the way, and Gino quickly found Lex among a pile of equipment. There was no way, among the group of bald men in white coats, only the bright braised egg attracted attention. At this moment, Lex tightened his lips. He was standing under the green can, constantly tapping the keyboard under the instrument to make final adjustments. His dark green eyes were so full of fanaticism that he didn't realize that Gino was already standing behind him. Gino stood behind Lex, looked at the experimental subject label B0 on the jar, smiled and joked, "Have you never thought about what will happen if you fail? Then come again." Lex said without looking back, glancing at the cheek reflected on the glass, "Scientists are not afraid of failure. As long as they can learn from failure, they will surely succeed one day." Gino shrugged, "I mean, what if you create an uncontrollable monster?" Lex smiled, with a proud look on his face, "Then I still have you, stupid brother. I trust you to help me deal with the mess." Gino sighed and said, "I just hope you don't end up in jail for illegal experiments." Lex replied venomously, "Even if I go to jail, I will live in the best single deluxe room and identify you as my accomplice." Gino rolled his eyes, this was really his good brother. The two brothers bickered while Lex completed the final adjustments. Taking a deep breath, Lex suppressed his inner nervousness. He clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Attention everyone! The experiment will begin in 1 minute." Time passed minute by minute, and when the hands skipped, Lex waved his arm, "Turn on the switch." Bang! The crimson metal button was pressed, and in the next second, countless light blue currents flowed along the pipes into the can in the center. The electric light flashed and crackled, and the green stone in the tank also emitted a dazzling green light with the current, and then decomposed into countless green debris that adhered to the clone's skin in the tank. The originally yellow skin turned paler. Under the transformation of kryptonite, the body continued to twitch, so that cracks gradually appeared on the surface of the skin. Crack! The more current flowed into the glass jar, and as the water temperature continued to rise, the eyes of the originally silent experimental subject trembled slightly, and the next second, they suddenly opened their eyes amidst everyone's exclamations. Negative emotions from B0 test subject +10, +10. Without any time to think, the experimental subject in the jar opened his mouth and suddenly inhaled a large mouthful of green liquid. The next moment, Gino observed that the blood vessels under the experimental subject's skin bulged, emitting a faint green light. "Aha!" The experimental subject was waving his arms and struggling wildly. He seemed to be very frightened and was tapping the glass jar in fear. His pure black eyes were full of horror as he looked down at a group of strangely dressed creatures. "He looks in pain," someone shouted looking at the experimental subject's tightened brows. "Mr. Lex, what should we do?" People were in a mess. In fact, many people had a pessimistic attitude towards this experiment. They didn't think it could succeed at one time, but the result was just the opposite. The experiment was successful. The experimental subject numbered B0 woke up, but everyone didn't know what to do next. Release it rashly? But who can guarantee that this experimental subject will not turn into a bat monster like Julie? Lex glanced at his brother. Gino's blue eyes were full of determination. The boy smiled and rubbed his wrists, nodding slightly to Lex. "I have everything. Call." Lex took a deep breath, his chest rose and fell, and then he made up his mind, "Everyone, leave the laboratory immediately." Lex roared angrily, "Seal this laboratory. No one is allowed to open the door to the laboratory before receiving any news from me." As if they had found the backbone, the helpless scientists quickly pushed and shoved out of the underground base, and the metal door slowly fell under Lex's control. Bang! As the door fell, only Gino and Lex were left in the entire base. "Oh, and there's also the experimental subject B0 struggling inside the tank. I received news from the editor and it will be published on the 1st. I have been writing more and saving articles these days." Chapter 57 Second Copy, Bizarro's Talent. Dip, beep, beep. The piercing sirens echoed in the empty experimental base. The red light shining on the cold glass adds an eerie atmosphere to this base. Under the glass jar, Lex could even hear his own heavy breathing. "Who? Why are you nervous? Is it a passion for science, or a demonstration of the possibility of an artificial god. Lex didn't know his own mental journey, so he subconsciously turned his head. His brother was raising his head and staring quietly at the contents of the nutrient tank. Gino's emotions seemed to affect Lex, and he felt his excited heartbeat gradually calm down. On the other side, Gino rubbed his neck, his eyes burning with fighting intent. He probably guessed what Lex had built. B0, also known as Bizarro, is the opposite of Superman. Super speed, super endurance, flight, he has all the basic abilities that Superman has. However, unlike Superman, his eyes shoot out not heat vision but ice beams, and what comes out of his mouth is not ice breath but burning flames. In different versions, the birth of Bizarro is often directly related to Lex Luthor. Unexpectedly, in this world, his cheap brother also created Bizarro. However, these are not important. Although he is the opposite of Superman, Bizarro is obviously not the opponent of the real Superman. What Gino values most is one of his talents, the ability to enhance his strength through green kryptonite. Gino lowered his head and looked at the golden copy card in his hand. With Bizarro's talent, he was bound to get it. Gino turned his head and whispered to Lex, "My brother, let him out." Lex looked deeply at Gino, leaned down and pressed the green button on the instrument, and said slowly in an undetectable voice, "I believe you, brother." As Lex pressed the switch with his finger. Bang! The glass container above my head shattered. The flying glass shards mixed with the liquid were scattered everywhere, falling like a torrential rain, and the large water droplets hit the cold floor with a crackling sound. The mixed water flow wetted the line and sent out sizzling sparks. Snapped! The circuit tripped, and the entire base suddenly fell into pitch black darkness. In the darkness where I can't even see my fingers. "Can you see him?" Lex clenched his fists and pulled a pistol from his pocket. "Of course, he is lying on the floor," Gino said calmly, his eyes slightly fixed on the figure lying on the iron plate in the darkness. His skin was pale and purple, like a zombie commonly seen in movies. His original black hair seemed to have become thinner due to the influence of kryptonite, and he was only wearing tight shorts. This tall guy was holding his hands across his chest, trembling like an ignorant child. "Wait a minute." Gino narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Bizarro, who was lying on the ground shaking with his eyes wide open. The other party did not show aggression. On the contrary, he held his hands like a frightened child and looked at Gino in horror with his big eyes. "Ah, ah!" Bizarro opened his lips, which were cold and cracked as if they were burnt by lime, and he let out an unexplained sob. Seeing the reaction of the experimental subject, the young man sighed and knocked on his head. "How could I forget that this guy's IQ is not high? If we say, what is the main reason why Bizarro's overall strength is not as good as De Chao? That must be due to his IQ of only 5 or 6 years old. Childishness and immaturity are Bizarro's trademarks. In other words, the soul of the guy lying trembling on the iron plate right now is that of a kid who still likes to eat lollipops in his tall body. What are you waiting for?" In the dark night, Lex looked at Gino in confusion. His brother was never a soft-hearted person. If Gino didn't do anything to the experimental subject, it meant that the experimental subject would not harm the two of them. "That's right." Gino glanced at the cheap man, with some pity in his eyes, and explained, "Your experimental subject may not have a high IQ." Lex frowned and looked hard at the trembling figure in the darkness. "Low IQ? What do you mean?" "That's what it means." Gino opened his legs and walked towards Bizarro. Lex was shocked. "Wait a minute, Gino, be careful of that monster." Gino ignored his brother's concern and slowly walked towards Bizarro. The sneakers made a clicking sound when stepping on the iron plate, and he walked towards Bizarro step by step with firm steps. "Damn it!" Lex gritted his teeth, thought for a while, turned around and ran towards the electric switch. He decided to let the underground base regain its light so that he could better observe the situation. On the other side, Bizarro's pure black eyes were full of fear. He looked at the guy walking towards him. He was very scared. There was an indescribable aura in the other person that made him subconsciously want to escape. "Wait a minute." Gino sped up and was standing in front of Bizarro in an instant. "Uh-huh." Bizarro kicked his legs, and his huge, pale body kept moving backwards until his back touched the cold wall. There was no way he could retreat. Bizarro looked around anxiously, and the guy was still approaching him. "Well." Bizarro clenched his fists, he was going to fight back. Kaka. Another string of sparks sounded, and the countless lights overhead returned to light, shining light into the darkness. The sudden increase in brightness made Bizarro cover his eyes in pain. Tears flowed from his eyes, and under the dazzling white light, Bizarro saw the figure slowly stretching out his arm. Under the support of the bright light behind him, the man seemed to have a halo behind him. Gino was condescending, lowered his head and stared into Bizarro's eyes, and said word by word, "From today on, your name is Bizarro. Be Bizarro." Bizarro tilted his head, learning the pronunciation of Gino, and a hoarse voice came out of his mouth. This seemed to be something worth celebrating for him. The original fear was gone. Bizarro held Gino's arm and shook it quickly. With a happy smile on his ugly face, he kept repeating Gino's words, "Bizarro, Bizarro." The golden card that only Gino could see was gently pinched by his fingertips. The moment Bizarro touched Gino's right hand, the golden card slowly dispersed and disintegrated, turning into countless brilliant golden particles and spilling into Bizarro's chest. Contact B0 and get B0 talent. The same as the first time, Gino didn't feel like he was shaking or trembling. His body was as smooth as breathing, and there was no change in his body. There are no eyes that are aching to wake up to the cold rays, nor throats to be itchy to burst into flames. With a slight guess in his mind, Gino smiled bitterly and shook off Bizarro's hand. He stretched out his hand to this naive guy and made a walking motion with 2 fingers toward the ground, gesturing for Bizarro to follow him. Bizarro. Bizarro hung his arms honestly, moving his body like a lazy zombie and following Gino. Kino. Lex, who hurriedly turned on the switch, was worried about Kino's safety and rushed over with a pistol in hand. As a result, he saw his experimental subject following Kino like a well-behaved baby. Immediately afterwards, Gino's next words made Lex a little confused. "Lex, do you have any kryptonite? Give me one." "Wait, I need to remind you, that thing is very harmful to you." Lex frowned and reminded Gino. As a brother, he naturally knew about Gino's situation. This is why Lex started research. He wanted to solve it for his brother. The effects of kryptonite. First of all, thank you to the reader 1455147117727412224 for the 200-point reward. Okay. Let's talk about some digressions next. This chapter solves the weakness of kryptonite. I will write everything that needs to be written. I have considered the development of the protagonist long before writing the book. This is an advanced revelation. The protagonist's system is like an intelligent AI. When the protagonist copies A, the system will copy this code like a computer. In the future, I will explain how the protagonist's system came about. Interested readers can take a guess. Not many Bizarro guessed it in the last issue, and they all went to guess the Day of Doom. Later, when the protagonist copies B, the system will determine the conflicting parts of the code. For example, A becomes weaker under the influence of kryptonite, and B becomes stronger under the influence of kryptonite. AI will intelligently determine to delete the A code and retain the B code, thereby enhancing the protagonist's strength. This is the basic operation logic of the system, and the best code will be replaced and retained. Strong, if it is the same code, it is doubled by ×2, over. Chapter 58 Awakening, Freezing Beam. Incandescent lights illuminate the underground base. The bright light shines on the 2 figures, and the cold wall stretches and twists their shadows. Feeling the caution in Lex's words, Gino was silent for a moment, took a deep breath and said, "I'm sure, Lex. Some things have to be done by someone, and some ideas have to be verified. The system will not tell it which talents it has copied from Bizarro, and these all need to be explored by Gino. In this process, taking risks is inevitable. As long as his attempts and efforts are meaningful, Kino is not averse to hardship." "Well, it's your choice." Lex didn't try to persuade him anymore. He knew Gino's character and agreed with Gino's decision. Lex turned and walked toward the safe on the other side. He squatted down and typed out Kino's birthday. Dib. The safe opened in response, revealing a row of dazzling emeralds inside. Lex put on his gloves and gently clasped a smaller kryptonite. He stared at the mysterious stone, took a deep breath, stood up and walked towards Gino. 50 meters, 40 meters. When the distance between the two narrowed to 10 meters, Lex stared into Gino's eyes and said in a low voice, "Tell me immediately if you feel any pain." "I know." Gino stared at the green kryptonite. Lex took steps. The green stone is getting closer and closer to Gino. 7 meters, 6 meters. Until the kryptonite in his field of vision continued to grow in size, Jino did not feel the feeling of exhaustion. Successful! A flash of enlightenment flashed in Jino's eyes, and he had a deeper understanding of the function of the system. The copied Bizarro talent successfully freed me from the limitations of kryptonite. Jino's eyes moved slightly, and he even felt an indescribable affinity for green kryptonite. Give it to me, I think I defeated these nasty rocks. Jino smiled at Lex, saying that he was not affected. Seeing that Jino was fine, Lex also breathed a sigh of relief. His bald head stretched out his hand to wipe away the fine beads of sweat on his forehead, and threw out the kryptonite in his hand. Here you go. Snapped. Jino stretched out his hand and gently held the kryptonite. The cold stone felt warm when it touched his palm. This feeling is very warm. Jino closed his eyes and felt the changes brought about by the kryptonite. It is like a traveler who has been walking for a day and throws his body into a warm bathtub, or like a bonfire to keep warm in the cold dark night. Every cell in his body was cheering for joy, and what he had been avoiding was now easily held in Jino's hand. Who? Jino enjoys the warmth brought by kryptonite, and Lex also observes Jino's changes. The veins in the arm holding the kryptonite popped out, and countless small blood vessels were affected by the kryptonite and turned into a deep dark green. They spread densely until they reached Kino's left temple. Suddenly, Jino felt itchy in his left eye, as if something was brewing and gathering in his eye. Snapped. Jino clasped his left eye, and the slight stinging sensation made him close his eyes. What's wrong? Jino. Lex looked nervously at Jino's reaction. No, I just feel a little uncomfortable. Jino couldn't describe the state he was in at this moment. His left eye felt sore and stinging, and large tears fell down his eye bags. But in the next moment, wisps of mist filled his eyes, and the tears easily froze on his cheeks, just like the ones on Jino's face. Dotted with a few ice tear moles. The feeling became more and more intense. Jino moved his arms and raised his eyes with great effort. He opened his eyes, and his originally dark blue eyes instantly became filled with a hint of cold mist. The cold mist holding the left eye became more and more dazzling, like a sea surface with clear blue waves, which contained an unfathomable ocean. The next moment, a thick and violent blue light beam lit up from Jino's left eye. Its grand blue light even overshadowed the light of the entire base. Get out of the way, Lex! Jino roared, and he subconsciously turned his head to avoid the cheap guy. Buzz! The energy contained in the left eye exploded completely, and a dazzling blue light pillar roared out from the left eye, shooting into the air like a cold light. It contained countless tiny ice flowers, and the sharp cold light exuded an icy mist, which was about to freeze. Like air, it shimmers on a glass jar. Bang! The fast and brilliant blue light emits a harsh high-frequency sound, like a violent wind and snow blowing and swaying in people's ears. The cold ray instantly hit the glass jar. Click click! The extremely cold light is like a cold poisonous snake spitting its core and clinging to the iron can. The moisture in the air condenses and turns into a layer of tiny ice fragments, which clings to the entire glass at an extremely fast speed and covers it with a layer of ice. Thick frost. As Jino's field of vision lingered, the light continued to erode, and the original frost gradually solidified and froze. In the blink of an eye, a huge ice sculpture with a hint of air conditioning leaned quietly against the silent laboratory. The originally warm environment also changed due to this ice sculpture. Is significantly reduced due to the presence of. Jino controlled the movement of his gaze. And the ice energy contained in his eyes also followed the trajectory of his gaze, leaving a series of ice chips. Who? Jino gasped for air, trying to dissipate the cold energy condensed in his left eye. As Jino's mind turned, the light that continued to be output quietly went out. Jino covered his left eye, which was covered with cold fog, and silently watched the scene in front of him. The originally clean and tidy underground base seemed to have turned into an ice and snow paradise. The experimental tank frozen into ice stood quietly on the spot, but there is no doubt that its internal structure has been shattered by extreme low temperature damage. It may only need someone to gently remove it. Just a little touch and it will fall apart. This is incredible. Lex looked at the scene in front of him in surprise. His eyes were full of enthusiasm. He turned to look at Kino, rubbed his hands and said, "You have to cooperate with my experiment, Kino." Now Lex looked at Kino as if he were a guinea pig. Kino smiled helplessly and said that he would cooperate with Lex. However, there are some doubts in my heart. If Bizarro's cold ray is also copied, why does it only have one eye? Gino had a vague guess in his mind, but he couldn't be sure yet. Bizarro! Bizarro, who looked like a zombie, screamed in aggrievedness, looked at Gino and Lex, and rubbed his belly. Bizarro! Gino glanced at Bizarro's ugly face, patted Lex on the shoulder and said, "What are you going to do?" Lex also recovered from his fanaticism and became a domineering bald president again. He pinched his chin and looked at Bizarro and said, "Leave him in the laboratory first. After that, I will ask my scientists to teach him language, and then try to restore him to his normal appearance." After listening to Lex's words, Gino nodded in approval. Lex's arrangement was reasonable and letting Bizarro run out would only cause panic in the town. Many people would definitely think that there was a zombie crisis. Chapter 59 A short story on a rainy night. Boom! Huge thunder sounded over the night sky of the metropolis. The heavy rain poured down, and the big raindrops added a bit of coldness to the night. In the heavy rain, a tall black man staggered and ran on the rainy night. His cheap leather shoes made a crackling sound on the water on the cement road. Hoo! The rain wet his clothes, making the man shiver. He ran towards the tallest building in the Steel City. As a bolt of lightning cut through the night, it brought a brief light, revealing a black marble erected in front of the building. Luther Group. The black man stared at the string of English letters, and then he moved his gaze to the Luther Tower. As an extremely wealthy country in the United States, the headquarters of the Luther family is located in the metropolis, and Lionel is undoubtedly a proud and conceited man. He built the building into the tallest building in the city to demonstrate the power of the Luther family and wealth. It was dark in the high-rise building at this moment. It was obvious that in this weather, even Lionel, who was known for his black heart and unscrupulousness, did not allow his employees to stay and work overtime. The black man ran closer and saw a faint light on the first floor of the building. The janitor responsible for the building's sanitation was busy with a vacuum cleaner. He had headphones on his head and was obviously having fun immersed in the music. Bang bang bang! The black man seemed to have seen the savior. He slapped the glass frantically and shouted, "Will, Will!" The cleaner seemed to hear someone calling his name. Will took off his earphones and the black man's voice broke into his ears. Will turned his head and saw the black man with a messy face and rain all over his body leaning weakly against the door, beating continuously. Covering the glass. "Earl!" Will dropped the vacuum cleaner and walked toward Earl, the black man. "What are you doing here?" Will knew Earl. The two were once colleagues and both worked for the Luther Group. However, they heard that Earl was injured while transporting fertilizer. He then left after receiving a large compensation from the Luther Group company. Earl held his chest under his windbreaker in pain and said slowly, "I want to see Lionel." The black man Earl clenched his fists and said with anger on his face, "I know he is here." Will sighed, looked away and said, "Sorry, Earl, you know I can't let you in, I need this job because I have a family and kids to support too." After listening to Will's words, the black man suddenly became anxious. He frowned and slapped the glass to vent his anger. "Will, you should know that they did something to me in the factory in that small town." As he spoke, Earl patted his chest, "I have an incurable disease." Will rolled his eyes, and here he goes again, the black man's usual refrain. He pursed his lips and said, "That's why you got fired, Earl." "No, you don't understand, my disease cannot be cured." Earl clenched his fists, looked at his former colleagues and begged, "Please, let me in, I must ask Lionel clearly, return there, it takes a factory to heal me." Looking at Earl who was messing around, Will sighed, stretched out his finger and pointed at the black man through the glass, "If you keep messing around, I'm going to call the guard." "No, please." Earl's face was full of helplessness. The black man's hands were tightly holding the iron door handle on the glass, and his big eyes were full of pleading. Will shook his head, no longer paying attention to the black man's prayers, and turned around to continue the previous cleaning work. Buzz buzz. Before he had gone far, Will heard a noise coming from behind. "Earl, I'm warning you." Will turned his head and saw Earl's body, which was leaning against the glass door, twitching violently. Its speed is so fast that it even turns into afterimages in the air, and its body is flashing at an extremely fast speed like a movie clip. Will's eyes widened, his face was blank, his mouth grew wide and he muttered, "What the f***ck is going on?" The next moment, it seemed that it had reached a certain critical point, and the originally flat and solid glass made by Dongfang also shattered under the extreme vibration frequency. "Wow! The entire piece of glass shattered suddenly, turning into countless tiny shards that fell like hail. Oh my god! Will screamed and subconsciously covered his cheek. Pa bang bang! Debris hit Will like a rainstorm, and the next moment, the man felt something hugging him. Earl! Will opened his eyes wide and looked at Earl, who was hugging his neck. Before the man could say anything, the next moment, the black man holding him trembled crazily again. Under the constant and rapid shaking, Will's neck was obviously not made of steel. Kaka! A clear sound of bone cracking mixed with the music echoed in the hall. They both fell to the ground. Earl, who was shaking violently, returned to normal again. The black man could not imagine looking at his colleague who fell to the ground. The other person stared blankly at the ceiling with his eyes wide open, and bright red blood gushed out from his mouth and nose. I killed someone. Earl raised his trembling hands and shook his head wildly. No, it's not my fault, I didn't mean it. He staggered to his feet, waved his arms and ran towards the rainy night outside the door. Buzz! An icy cold wave hit the water glass on the table. It wasn't until the entire cup was frozen into an ice sculpture that Gino extinguished the freezing rays in his eyes. Phew, it's a little effective. Gino stood up and stretched. After half a day of fumbling, he was able to disperse the energy from his left eye to his right eye, thereby increasing the attack range. Gino rubbed his sore neck and walked out of the room. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He planned to go to the kitchen to find something to eat. Gino found some pizza from the kitchen, took a glass of milk, and planned to go back to the room for a late-night snack. Passing Lex's room, Gino glanced inside. The cheap guy didn't sleep either. He was leaning on the large boss chair, holding the phone in one hand and looking a little ugly. What happens? Gino changed his mind and walked into Lex's room carrying food. Like his personality, Lex's house is clean and efficient. Except for the fact that the table and chairs are not green, Lex's quilt and even the bed are all green, and the desk is filled with business documents and some scientific journals. Gino put the plate on the table, picked up the milk and took a sip, asking Lex what happened. Okay. Lex said to the other end of the phone, I understand. After saying that, Lex hung up the phone and threw the touch-sensitive phone on the table with a gleeful expression on his face. Glancing at Gino, Lex picked up the pizza, took a bite, and sneered, a janitor died at the head office, and now many media are reporting on it. Cleaner? Murder for love. Gino raised his eyebrows and guessed. After all, a cleaner didn't have much money, so he could easily rule out murder for money. Lex sneered, chewing on the pizza and said, who knows, let Lionel have a headache about this. Thanks to the noontime boss for the 1,666 book coins reward, thank you boss, very louding. Adding updates for the boss. Chapter 60 happened. A new day. So, this is the focus of next week's final exam, and I hope you can give your family a satisfactory answer at the end of June. The bell rang for the end of get out of class, and Chloe walked out holding a stack of review materials. Peter and Clark followed Chloe. Xiao He scratched his head and turned to look at the empty seats. So, Gino hasn't come to class today. Yes. Chloe curled her lips and pointed to the books in her arms with her chin. These are review materials. I want to send them to Gino. Peter and Clark looked at each other with ambiguous smiles on their faces. Chloe was going to find Gino, and Peter could only look at Clark. Okay, Clark, what are you going to do? Go home and play some video games. Clark was obviously not a good student in reviewing. The older boy pursed his lips and said, my parents recently traveled to the metropolis, so. Peter quickly put his arms around Clark's neck and said, great, I'll go with you. Black people naturally hate studying, and Pete is no exception. He would rather spend his studying time sleeping. The three of them parted ways at the school gate. Clark drove the off-road vehicle with some paint peeling off and returned to the Kent farm with Peter. The two are addicted to video games. Bang! Clark fiddled with the controller, operating the character to knock down Pete. Please. Peter let out a wail and slumped on the sofa without any image. What did Clark just want to say to Pete? There was a slight sound in my ears. Wait a minute, I think I heard something. Clark put down the game controller, pushed open the door and ran out of the farm. The afternoon sun hung over the farm, and Clark stepped toward the sound. Pushing open the old warehouse door, Clark looked up at the loft above his head. There was a continuous trembling sound on the yellowed wooden board. Click. "Who's up there?" Clark shouted with his lips pursed. No one responded. Behind him, Pete also hurried over, holding a strong flashlight in his hand and looking nervously at his companions. What happened? After the Jolie incident, Pete was obviously a little nervous. Go up and have a look. Clark clenched his fists. The shoes made a clicking sound on the old wooden boards. The two walked towards the attic, and Peter turned the flashlight to shine on the corner of the attic. The strong light pierced the darkness. Under the dazzling light, a tall black man lay in the corner with sweat on his face. He looked weak, his eyes illuminated by the light, and the black man struggled to lift his arms. Here, where did this tramp come from? Pete cursed, and he picked up the pitchfork and was about to teach his compatriots from hundreds of years ago. Wait a minute. Clark held out his arm to stop Peter. The boy narrowed his eyes, his gaze lingered on the black man's features for a moment and said, I know him. You are Earl. Clark's eyes were filled with shock. Why did you show up at my farm? The black man shook his head and leaned against the wall with a trembling voice. I came to see your father. He is the only person I trust. Earl told Clark what happened to him. An experiment by the Luther Group. Clark frowned slightly, and the figure of Gino flashed in his mind. He shook his head and said, I think there must be some misunderstanding. No, there is no misunderstanding. Earl was a little excited. Before Clark could reply, he grabbed Clark's arm. Look at my hands. The blood vessels have been contaminated dark green. Is this normal? The moment Earl touched Clark, a terrible feeling of weakness instantly enveloped Clark, and the blood vessels on the back of his hand suddenly swelled and glowed dark green. Plop! Clark's legs weakened and he fell down, while Earl also twitched wildly and flashed his body at the same time. Ahem! Clark weakly clasped the floor and looked up at Peter with difficulty. Call an ambulance. Earl was taken away in an ambulance. Pete and Clark are sitting in the hospital hallway, talking about Earl. Peter was a little curious and said, So, how did you and that down-and-out uncle meet? Clark put his hands together to support his chin and said with a look of reminiscence in his eyes. Earl was once an employee of my father's farm and worked for my family for 10 summers. Later, in pursuit of a higher salary, he joined the local Luther chemical plant. I remember he once taught me how to play guitar and said that boys who could play guitar could attract girls. No. Pete interrupted Clark's reminiscence, playing the guitar won't attract girls, you have to be rich. Clark's face turned dark, and he sighed and said, Anyway, that's the way it is, Earl is a good man. I just don't know what he went through and contracted a strange disease. While the two were communicating, 2 policemen walked in outside the hospital. Clark recognized the 2 policemen as the policemen who had visited his farm. Nurse, which ward is Earl Skeena in? They showed their police badges, and the nurse checked the computer and said, in Ward 5 on the 2nd floor. Clark and Peter looked at each other and then stood up. Clark walked towards the 2 police officers. Sorry, I'm Earl's friend. What happened? What kind of trouble could Earl get into if the American police came to his door? The 2 policemen glanced at Clark. You are Mr. Keno's friend, right? That's right. Okay, we can tell you something. The senior police officer in his 50s lowered his voice. We received an order from the Metropolitan Police that Earl was suspected of murdering a cleaner of the Luther Group. What? Clark was filled with shock. This is impossible, Erda. Before Clark could finish speaking, there was an exclamation from the 2nd floor of the hospital. Help is needed here. The 2 policemen quickly dropped Clark and ran toward the 2nd floor of the hospital. Clark and Peter quickly followed. When they climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, they saw Earl in the hospital ward wearing a hospital gown twitching crazily, so fast that he even left countless after images in the air. Stop him! 2 policemen roared and lunged at Earl. Bang! The 2 people who tried to stop Earl were instantly thrown away, hit hard on the iron frame in the corner, and opened their mouths to wail in pain. Earl, what's wrong with you? Clark opened his arms and rushed toward the man. Seizing the opportunity, Clark spread his fingers and clasped the man's wrist violently, restraining Earl's body from shaking. Clamped by a pair of iron hands, Earl swung for a while, and seemed to have exhausted all his strength and fell into Clark's arms. Plop! Clark also suddenly became weak, and they both fell to the cold floor. As if his entire body was immersed in cold sea water, a feeling of powerlessness swept through his limbs. Clark, who had heavy eyelids, braced himself for it. The second before he fell into coma, he told himself in his heart, I must ask Jino to find out. After all, Earl's state is very much like that of guys exposed to kryptonite. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.